Welcome back, friend, to another journey together. Tonight, you'll explore the timeless wisdom Buddhist masters have cherished through generations. Teachings designed to calm restless minds and cultivate profound inner peace. Before we start, feel free to share where you're listening from and the time in your part of the world. I've carefully selected a collection of powerful Zen stories, each offering potent insights that awaken your innate ability to let go of anxiety and stress. Whether your mind is scattered or you've struggled before to find calmness, remember the Buddha's insightful words. All that we are is the result of what we have thought. With our thoughts, we make the world. As we journey tonight through encounters between curious students and wise masters, you'll notice something remarkable beginning to happen. The weight of tension will gently lift from your shoulders, your breathing will effortlessly deepen, and you'll find yourself drifting naturally toward a state of deep, healing tranquility. Find comfort now. Allow yourself to fully surrender to the quiet power of this moment. Take one intentional breath with me, and as you exhale, recognize that you've opened a gateway into timeless wisdom that's patiently awaited your arrival across the ages. Now let us begin with our first story. This timeless story is about the nature of true understanding and the journey beyond conceptual thinking. This is the sound of one hand. In the ancient halls of Kenin Temple, where golden light filtered through paper screens and the scent of incense drifted through quiet corridors, there lived a master known as Mokurai, whose name meant silent thunder. Despite his fearsome reputation for wisdom, Mokurai had grown fond of a 12-year-old boy named Toyo, whose bright eyes and eager spirit reminded him of his own early days on the path. Each morning and evening, Toyo watched the older disciples file solemnly into Mokurai's private chamber for Sanzen, the intimate guidance sessions where masters presented koans to students. These paradoxical riddles were designed to exhaust the thinking mind and open doorways to direct insight. Toyo's heart burned with curiosity about these mysterious teachings. "Master," Toyo said one day, bowing deeply, "I wish to receive Sanzen instruction like the other students." Mokurai studied the boy's earnest face. "Wait a while," he said gently. "You're too young for such practices." But Toyo's persistence was as steady as mountain stones. Day after day, he returned with the same request, until finally, Mokurai consented with a slight smile. That evening, little Toyo approached the threshold of his master's chamber with reverent care. He struck the brass gong to announce his presence, its sound echoing through the temple halls. 3 times he bowed outside the door before entering and taking his place before Mokurai in respectful silence. "You can hear the sound of 2 hands when they clap together," Mokurai said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of teaching. "Now, show me the sound of 1 hand." Toyo bowed deeply and retreated to his small room to contemplate this puzzle. As he sat by his window, the evening air carried the melodic voices of geishas from the entertainment district below. Their songs floated up like silk ribbons on the breeze, and suddenly, Toyo's face brightened. "Ah, I have it!" he exclaimed. The next evening, when Mokurai again asked for the sound of 1 hand, young Toyo began to sing the geisha's melodies with careful attention to each note. No, Mokurai said, shaking his head. "That will never do. That is not the sound of 1 hand. You've not got it at all." Thinking the music might be too distracting, Toyo moved his sleeping quarters to a quieter part of the temple. There, in deeper silence, he meditated again on the impossible question. Late one night, He heard water dripping steadily from the roof into a clay pot below. Each drop created a perfect sound in the darkness. "I have it," he thought with excitement. When he appeared before his teacher the next day, Toyo carefully imitated the rhythm and tone of dripping water. "What is that?" Mokurai asked. "That is the sound of dripping water, but not the sound of one hand. Try again." Night after night, Toyo searched for the answer. He offered his master the sighing of wind through bamboo, but this was rejected. He presented the cry of an owl piercing the mountain stillness, but this too was refused. The chirping of crickets, the rustle of leaves, the distant temple bells, none of these satisfied Mokurai's question. More than 10 times Toyo appeared before his teacher with different sounds. Each time, he was turned away with gentle correction. For almost a year, the boy pondered what the sound of one hand might be, his young mind wrestling with the impossible riddle. Then, one quiet evening, as cherry blossoms fell like snow outside his window, something shifted in Toyo's understanding. He entered a meditation deeper than any he had known before, a stillness that transcended all sounds, all concepts, all seeking. In that profound silence, he found what he had been searching for. "I could collect no more sounds," he explained later to his master, "so I reached the soundless sound." Mokurai's eyes sparkled with recognition. Little Toyo had realized the sound of one hand. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. What emerges from this story is a teaching about the nature of true understanding and the limitations of conceptual thinking. The sound of one hand represents the direct experience of reality beyond the dualistic mind that constantly seeks to grasp and categorize. Why do we struggle so profoundly with paradoxes like the sound of one hand? Zen Buddhism reveals that our ordinary consciousness operates through comparison and contrast. We understand hot by knowing cold, light by knowing darkness, sound by knowing silence. This dualistic thinking serves us well in practical life, but it becomes a barrier when we seek to understand the fundamental nature of reality. The deeper teaching here shows us that some truths cannot be grasped through intellectual analysis. They can only be directly experienced through what Zen calls don't know mind, a state of open awareness that doesn't immediately categorize or conceptualize experience. Toyo's journey represents every seeker's path, from conceptual searching to direct realization. Consider how often we approach life's deepest questions with the same strategy Toyo initially employed. When faced with existential concerns, who am I? What is the meaning of life? How can I find peace? We typically seek answers in external sources, collect information, and try to solve these mysteries through thinking. Yet the most profound insights often arise not from accumulating more concepts, but from releasing our attachment to conceptual understanding altogether. Nothing is an accident in Toyo's journey. Each rejected answer served a purpose, gradually exhausting his conceptual mind and preparing him for direct insight. The geisha's music taught him that beauty alone is not truth. The dripping water showed him that natural phenomena, while peaceful, are still within the realm of dualistic perception. Each failure was actually a step towards success, stripping away his reliance on external sounds until only the soundless sound remained. Zen master Huangpo taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." This points to the heart of Toyo's realization. He had to move beyond thinking about the sound of one hand to directly experiencing it. This shift from conceptual to experiential knowing is at the core of all authentic spiritual realization. In our modern lives, we might recognize this pattern in moments when we've struggled with a problem through intense thinking, only to have the solution arise spontaneously when we let go of our mental effort. The answer to the sound of one hand is not a sound at all, but the awareness within which all sounds arise and pass away. It is the consciousness that experiences, but is not limited by any particular experience. The Buddha said, "However many holy words you read, however many you speak, what good will they do you if you do not act upon them?" Toyo's story reminds us that spiritual understanding must move beyond intellectual knowledge to direct realization. The sound of one hand cannot be learned from books or explained in words. It must be discovered through the direct experience of our own aware presence. This teaching has immediate relevance for anyone seeking deeper meaning in life. Instead of constantly seeking external validation or accumulating more information, we can learn to rest in the awareness that observes all experience. This is not a passive state, but a dynamic presence that meets each moment with fresh openness rather than preconceived notions. Tonight, as you rest in the quiet of this moment, can you sense the awareness that experiences but is not limited by any particular experience? This is your own soundless sound, the consciousness that has been present through every moment of your life, witnessing all changes while remaining unchanged itself. As the Buddha taught, look within, you are the Buddha. The sound of one hand is not something exotic or distant. It is the most intimate reality, your own awakened nature, always present, always available, waiting to be recognized in the silence between thoughts. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a story about the ultimate freedom that comes from transcending our identification with the physical body. This is the hot pyre. In a mountain monastery where morning mist clung to ancient pine trees and the sound of temple bells echoed across valleys, there lived a remarkable Zen nun named Eshun. For over 60 years, she had walked the path of awakening with unwavering dedication, her presence radiating the deep peace that comes from a life fully devoted to truth. As her body grew frail with age, Eshun knew her time in this world was drawing to a close. Rather than waiting passively for death to find her, Eshun chose to meet it with the same mindful intention she had brought to every aspect of her practice. She called several monks to her side on a clear autumn morning when the air was crisp and the leaves were turning golden. "Please, gather wood in the courtyard," she instructed them with calm authority. "Build a funeral pyre." The monks looked at each other with confusion and concern. Their beloved teacher was still alive, still walking and speaking clearly. Why was she requesting such a thing? But Eshun's reputation for wisdom was legendary, and they had learned to trust her guidance even when they couldn't understand it. Quietly, they collected dry wood and arranged it carefully in the monastery's central courtyard, creating a traditional funeral pyre. When the preparation was complete, Eshun emerged from her quarters wearing her finest robes. Without hesitation or ceremony, she walked to the center of the wooden structure and seated herself in the lotus position, her back straight and her hands folded peacefully in her lap. Her face showed no trace of fear or uncertainty, only the serene composure of someone who had found complete freedom from attachment. "Light the fire," she instructed the monks, who stood frozen in amazement at her composure. As the flames began to lick at the edges of the pyre, growing stronger with each passing moment. One of the younger monks could no longer contain his concern. The sight of his revered teacher sitting calmly in the center of the growing fire overwhelmed his understanding.
"Oh, nun!"
He shouted above the crackling of the burning wood.
"Is it hot in there?"
Eshin turned her gaze toward the concerned monk, and her eyes sparkled with the same teaching spirit that had guided countless students over the decades. Even in this ultimate moment, she remained a teacher. "Such a matter would concern only a stupid person like yourself," she replied with gentle firmness, her voice carrying clearly despite the flames that now surrounded her completely. The fire grew higher, and Ishan passed away in perfect peace, leaving behind a teaching that would echo through the centuries. The Buddha once said, "The body is like an earthen vessel, fragile and temporary, but the spirit within is indestructible." This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound teaching embedded in Eshun's final act. She demonstrated complete freedom from our most fundamental attachment, identification with the physical body. Why do we find Eshun's story so challenging to our ordinary understanding? Zen Buddhism explains that most human suffering stems from our deep identification with temporary phenomena, our bodies, thoughts, emotions, and circumstances. We mistake these changing conditions for our true identity, creating endless anxiety about their inevitable transformation. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding what Zen calls the deathless death. Eshun had realized through decades of practice that her essential nature was not the aging body that housed her awareness, but the consciousness itself, timeless, formless, and unaffected by physical change. From this perspective, death becomes not an ending, but a transition, like taking off worn-out clothes. Nothing is an accident in how this teaching comes to us. Eshun's response to the monk's concern, calling him stupid for worrying about physical heat, wasn't cruel, but compassionate. She was pointing to the stupidity of identifying with temporary phenomena while missing our eternal nature. The physical sensation of heat was utterly irrelevant to who she truly was. Consider how much of our daily anxiety revolves around threats to our temporary identities. We worry about aging, illness, failure, rejection, or loss because we believe these temporary conditions define us. We spend enormous energy protecting and maintaining what Buddhist teaching calls the false self, the collection of physical sensations, memories, and mental patterns we mistake for our true identity. Zen Master Bankei taught, "You are perfect just as you are, and you could use a little improvement." This paradox points to the same truth Eshun embodied. Our essential nature is already complete and unaffected by changing conditions. Yet we can cultivate greater recognition of this truth through practice. Eshun's fearlessness in the face of flames represents the ultimate fruit of spiritual practice, complete freedom from identification with anything temporary. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent to physical comfort or safety in daily life, but rather holding these concerns lightly without the desperate attachment that creates suffering. Look deeply at your own experience. How much mental energy do you spend protecting your image, your comfort, your plans, your preferences? These are all forms of the same fundamental attachment that Eshun had transcended. While we may not be called to her extreme demonstration, we can practice letting go of our smaller attachments in everyday situations. When someone criticizes us, can we remain centered without defending our ego? When we experience physical discomfort, can we observe it without completely identifying with it? When our plans fall apart, can we adapt without feeling that our essential self has been threatened? The Buddha said, attachment is the root of suffering. Eshun's final teaching shows us what complete non-attachment looks like. She was so free from identification with her body that physical pain became as irrelevant as a change in weather, something happening in her awareness but not defining her experience. This level of realization may seem impossibly distant from our ordinary consciousness, yet it points to a freedom available in smaller ways throughout our daily lives. Every time we choose presence over reactivity, acceptance over resistance, or love over fear, we touch the same deathless awareness that Eshun embodied so completely. Her story also reveals something profound about the nature of wisdom itself. True wisdom is not an intellectual understanding, but a lived realization that transforms how we meet every experience. Eshun didn't just know intellectually that she was more than her body. She embodied this truth so completely that even death became an opportunity for teaching. Tonight, as you notice the various sensations, thoughts, and emotions moving through your awareness, can you sense the unchanging consciousness that observes them all? This witness awareness, present in comfort and discomfort, joy and sorrow, health and illness, is your own deathless nature. As the Buddha taught, all conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence. Eshun's story reminds us that our deepest work is not protecting the temporary, but recognizing the eternal within ourselves, the awareness that remains untouched by any condition, including the ultimate condition of physical death. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the nature of universal compassion and the ego's resistance to loving inclusively. This is the farmer's exception. In the gentle hills of rural Japan, where rice fields stretched like green mirrors reflecting the sky, and farmers worked in harmony with seasonal rhythms, there lived a simple farmer whose heart had been broken by loss. His beloved wife, the light of his life for 30 years, had passed away after a brief illness, leaving him alone with his grief and memories. Seeking comfort in his sorrow, the farmer approached a Tendai priest, known for his wisdom and compassionate heart. The priest lived in a small temple nestled among bamboo groves, where the sound of wind through the leaves created a natural symphony of peace. "Honored teacher," the farmer said, bowing deeply, "my wife has died, and my heart is heavy with sorrow. Would you please recite sutras for her soul? I wish to ensure that she gains merit from your prayers." The priest's eyes filled with understanding. He had seen many grieving hearts and knew the profound need to feel that love continues beyond death. "Of course," he replied gently, "it would be my honor to recite sutras for your dear wife." For the next hour, the priest chanted ancient prayers in his melodious voice, the sacred words floating through the temple like invisible light. The farmer listened with deep reverence, feeling that each syllable carried his love across the boundary of death to his beloved. When the recitation was complete, the farmer looked up with questioning eyes. "Venerable one, do you think my wife will truly gain merit from these prayers?" The priest smiled with infinite gentleness. "Not only your wife, but all sentient beings will benefit from the recitation of sutras. When we offer prayers with sincere hearts, the merit naturally flows out to embrace every living creature, every person, every animal, every being capable of suffering and joy." The farmer's brow furrowed as he considered this. While the idea of universal benefits seemed generous, it also troubled him. "If you say all sentient beings will benefit," he said slowly, "then my wife may be very weak in the spirit world, and others might take advantage of her, getting the benefit that should rightfully be hers. Could you please recite sutras just for her alone?" The priest's expression remained patient and kind. "Dear friend, this is the very essence of Buddhist teaching, to offer blessings and wish merit for every living being. True compassion knows no boundaries. When we pray for all beings, we align ourselves with the Buddha's own infinite heart." The farmer nodded thoughtfully, appearing to accept this explanation. "That is indeed a fine teaching," he said. "I can see the wisdom in blessing all beings with merit." But then his face darkened slightly, and he leaned forward with a conspiratorial whisper. "However, please make one small exception. I have a neighbor who has been rough and mean to me for years. He insults my farming methods, lets his animals eat my crops, and speaks badly of me in the village. Just exclude him from all those sentient beings when you pray." The priest remained silent for a long moment, understanding that this request revealed something profound about the human heart and its capacity for selective love. As the Buddha observed, hatred is never conquered by hatred. Hatred is only conquered by love. The deeper teaching here shows us how the ego creates exceptions to universal compassion, drawing circles around who deserves our love and kindness. Why do we find it so natural to make exceptions like the farmers? Zen Buddhism reveals that our ordinary consciousness operates through a fundamental dualism that divides the world into us and them, deserving and undeserving, friend and enemy. This divisive thinking feels natural because it served our ancestors' survival needs, but it becomes a spiritual obstacle when we seek to cultivate genuine compassion. Nothing is an accident in how this story unfolds. The farmer's grief for his wife demonstrates his capacity for profound love, yet his resentment toward his neighbor shows how that same heart can close when faced with someone who has caused him pain. This contradiction exists within all of us. We can love deeply and exclude freely, often in the same moment. Look deeply at your own experience of love and compassion. How easily do you extend kindness to family members versus strangers? How quickly does your heart close when someone treats you unfairly? The farmer's request to exclude his difficult neighbor represents a universal human tendency to withdraw our compassion from those who challenge us. Consider the subtle ways we make similar exceptions throughout our days. We feel compassion for victims of natural disasters, but judgment toward those who make poor financial decisions. We extend patience to children, but irritation towards slow-moving elderly people. We offer forgiveness to friends, but withhold it from public figures whose politics we dislike. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, "When another person makes you suffer, it is because he suffers deeply within himself, and his suffering is spilling over. He does not need punishment, he needs help." This perspective transforms how we see the farmer's difficult neighbor. Perhaps his meanness stems from his own unhealed wounds, his own fear and pain manifesting as aggression. The Buddha said, "If you truly loved yourself, you would never harm another." This reveals why true compassion must be universal rather than selective. When we exclude someone from our circle of care, we actually harm ourselves by maintaining the very divisive thinking that creates suffering in the first place. The farmer's request also illuminates something profound about the nature of merit and spiritual benefit. In Buddhist understanding, genuine merit cannot be hoarded or distributed selectively. It flows naturally from sincere practice, benefiting all beings whether we intend it or not, like the light of a candle that illuminates everything around it without discrimination. This teaching has immediate practical applications in our daily lives. Every time we catch ourselves making exceptions to our compassion, every time we justify withholding kindness from someone who has hurt us, we can remember the farmer's story and ask ourselves, what would happen if I included this person in my circle of care? This doesn't mean becoming passive or failing to set appropriate boundaries with difficult people. Rather, it means maintaining an inner stance of goodwill, even toward those whose behavior we cannot accept. We can oppose harmful actions while still recognizing the humanity and inherent worth of those who perform them. The priest's patient response to the farmer's request demonstrates skillful compassion. He doesn't lecture or shame the farmer for his very human desire to exclude his enemy. Instead, he embodies the inclusive love he teachings, showing through his own example what universal compassion looks like in practice. Tonight, as you reflect on the relationships in your life, can you notice where you've drawn boundaries around your compassion? Is there someone you've excluded from your circle of care because of past hurts or current conflicts? What would it feel like to include them in your silent well wishes, not because they deserve it, but because universal love allows for no exceptions? As the Buddha taught, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. The farmer story reminds us that our spiritual work is not to perfect others, but to perfect our own capacity for boundless compassion. A love so vast it has no exceptions, no exclusions, no fine print. Let us continue on our journey with a story about the difference between knowledge and wisdom, between teaching others and transforming ourselves. This is a mother's advice. In the scholarly halls of a prestigious monastery during the Tokugawa era, when learning and literature flourished throughout Japan, there lived a young Shingon master named Jiyu. Brilliant and ambitious, he had become renowned as one of the finest Sanskrit scholars of his generation. Ancient texts that puzzled other monks opened their secrets to his keen intellect, and his reputation for wisdom spread far beyond the monastery walls. Jiyu particularly excelled at delivering lectures to his fellow students. In the monastery's main hall, where scrolls of sacred texts lined the walls and afternoon light streamed through rice paper windows, he would hold court with confidence and eloquence. His presentations were masterful displays of knowledge, weaving together complex philosophical concepts with quotations from dozens of sutras. Other students would sit in rapt attention as Jiyu demonstrated his comprehensive understanding of Buddhist doctrine. Word of her son's scholarly achievements eventually reached Jiyu's elderly mother, who lived in a simple cottage in the mountains. She had raised him with great sacrifice, working tirelessly to ensure he could pursue his spiritual education. Now, hearing reports of his fame as a teacher and lecturer, she felt compelled to write him a letter. Her words came from a heart that had spent decades in quiet contemplation, a mother's wisdom earned through years of simple living and genuine practice. She took up her brush and wrote with careful strokes. "My dear son, I do not think you became a devotee of the Buddha because you desired to turn into a walking dictionary for others. There is no end to information and commentary, glory and honor. The mind that seeks recognition through knowledge is like a hungry ghost, never satisfied, no matter how much it consumes." She paused, her weathered hands steady as she continued, "I wish you would stop this lecture business. Shut yourself up in a little temple in a remote part of the mountains. Devote your time to meditation, and in this way, attain true realization. The Buddha's teaching is not meant to impress others, but to transform oneself." When Jiyu received his mother's letter, he felt the words pierce through his scholarly pride like arrows finding their mark. In the quiet of his study, surrounded by the very texts and commentaries his mother was questioning, he began to understand that his brilliant lectures might actually be obstacles to his own awakening. The Buddha taught, "A man is not learned simply because he talks much. He who is patient, free from hatred and fear, is called learned." This teaching lies at the heart of the mother's wisdom. She understood that her son's intellectual brilliance, while impressive, had become a substitute for the direct spiritual realization he originally sought. Why do we so easily confuse knowledge about spirituality with spiritual realization itself? Zen Buddhism explains that the thinking mind loves to accumulate information and concepts because this gives the ego a sense of accomplishment and identity. We can spend years studying sacred texts, memorizing teachings, and discussing philosophy, while never directly experiencing the truth these words point toward. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding the difference between what Zen calls finger pointing at the moon and the moon itself. Jiyu had become fascinated with the finger, the words, concepts, and intellectual frameworks of Buddhism, while losing sight of the moon they were meant to reveal: direct awakening and liberation from suffering. Nothing is an accident in how this teaching came through Jiyu's mother rather than another scholarly master. Mothers see through pretense in ways that colleagues cannot. Her love for her son allowed her to perceive what his admirers missed, that his pursuit of recognition was leading him away from, rather than toward, genuine realization. Look deeply at your own relationship with knowledge and wisdom. How often do we gather information about personal growth, spirituality, or mindfulness without actually practicing what we learn? We read books about meditation instead of meditating, attend workshops on mindfulness without cultivating present moment awareness, or discuss enlightenment concepts without examining our own consciousness. The mother's advice to shut yourself up in a little temple represents the inward turn necessary for authentic spiritual development. This doesn't necessarily mean physical isolation, but rather a willingness to step back from external validation and focus on inner transformation. It means choosing practice over performance, depth over breadth, being over knowing. Zen master Dogen taught, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. Jiyu's lecturing had become a way of studying Buddhist concepts without studying himself. His mother's wisdom redirected him toward the more challenging work of self-examination and direct experience. Consider how this pattern manifests in modern life. We attend personal development seminars and leave feeling inspired but unchanged. We share wisdom quotes on social media while struggling with the same internal conflicts. We give advice to others about problems we haven't resolved in ourselves. Like Jiyu, we can become walking dictionaries of insights that haven't penetrated our actual experience. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." This speaks to the quality versus quantity distinction the mother was making. One moment of genuine realization is worth more than years of scholarly commentary because it actually transforms our relationship to life rather than simply adding to our mental collection of concepts. The mother's letter also reveals something profound about the nature of true teaching. The most powerful lessons often come from those who have lived wisdom rather than just studied it. Her simple, direct advice cut through all of Jiyu's sophisticated philosophical knowledge to address what really mattered: his spiritual development. This story illuminates why Zen emphasizes direct experience over intellectual understanding. Reading about water doesn't quench thirst, and studying maps doesn't constitute traveling. Similarly, learning about enlightenment is entirely different from the direct recognition of our own awakened nature. The mother's suggestion that Jiyu practice in a remote part of the mountains points to the value of solitude in spiritual development. Away from the applause and recognition that fed his ego, he could encounter himself more directly. In solitude, there's no audience to impress, no reputation to maintain, only the raw honesty of facing our own mind. Tonight, as you consider your own spiritual journey, can you distinguish between your intellectual understanding and your lived wisdom? Are there teachings you can discuss eloquently but haven't yet embodied? What would change if you shifted your focus from learning more to practicing more deeply what you already know? As the Buddha taught, an ounce of practice is worth more than tons of preaching. Jiyu's mother understood that her son's true calling was not to become a celebrated teacher, but to become authentically awake. Her loving intervention redirected him from the endless pursuit of knowledge toward the direct realization that transforms not just understanding, but being itself. Our next story reveals the profound wisdom that emerges from disciplined daily practice and the integration of spiritual principles into every aspect of life. This is Soyen Shaku's rules. At the turn of the 20th century, when East first met West in the realm of spiritual teaching, there lived a remarkable Zen master named Soyen Shaku. He held the unique distinction of being the first Zen teacher to bring the ancient wisdom of Buddhism to American soil, crossing oceans not just physically, but culturally, carrying timeless truths into a rapidly modernizing world. Soyen Shaku was a man of striking contradictions that perfectly embodied the Zen spirit. His presence radiated both fierce intensity and gentle compassion, qualities he captured in his own words. "My heart burns like fire, but my eyes are as cold as dead ashes." This was not the coldness of indifference, but the clarity of a mind unattached to outcomes, watching the dance of life with perfect equanimity while engaging it with passionate commitment. Despite his profound realizations and growing fame as a teacher, Soyen Shaku understood that enlightenment without discipline is merely an intellectual concept. True awakening must be lived moment by moment, breath by breath, through the countless small choices that make up each day. Therefore, he created a set of 10 rules that became the foundation of his daily practice. Each morning before dawn, while the world still slept in darkness, Soyen Shaku would light incense in his simple room and sit in meditation. This was not mere ritual, but a daily recommitment to presence, a way of beginning each day by returning to the source of all awareness. He retired at the same hour each night, understanding that rhythm creates the container within which spiritual practice can flourish. His relationship with food was equally disciplined, eating at regular intervals with careful moderation, never allowing himself to reach the point of complete satisfaction. This wasn't asceticism for its own sake, but recognition that a body and mind kept slightly empty remain more alert and responsive to subtle spiritual insights. Perhaps most remarkably, Soyen Shaku maintained perfect consistency in his interactions with others. He received guests with the same centered presence he maintained when alone. And when alone, he preserved the same gracious attention he offered to visitors. This meant that his spiritual practice wasn't compartmentalized into meditation periods, but extended seamlessly through every human encounter. His relationship with speech was equally mindful. He watched his words carefully, and whatever he said, he practiced faithfully. This integration of speech and action prevented the gap between ideals and reality that undermines so many spiritual seekers. When opportunities arose, he moved decisively without hesitation, yet always with careful consideration. He had learned to act from wisdom rather than impulse, engaging life fully while maintaining deep discernment. He refused to waste energy on regret about the past, instead keeping his attention focused on the future and the present moment's possibilities. Most beautifully, Soyen Shaku embodied what he called the fearless attitude of a hero and the loving heart of a child. This perfect balance of courage and tenderness allowed him to meet life's challenges without defensiveness, while maintaining an open, wonder-filled approach to each day's experiences. Even his relationship with sleep and waking reflected his spiritual understanding. Each night, he retired as if entering his final sleep, releasing all attachment to outcomes and surrendering completely to rest. Each morning, he left his bed instantly upon waking, casting aside the comfort of sleep like discarded shoes, ready to meet the new day with fresh energy and attention. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. What emerges from Soyen Shaku's story is the profound truth that spiritual realization is not a peak experience to be achieved once, but a way of living to be cultivated daily through countless small practices. Why do we struggle to maintain consistent spiritual practices? Zen Buddhism explains that the untrained mind seeks dramatic experiences and immediate results, missing the transformative power of simple repetition. We want enlightenment to be a mountain peak we climb once rather than a garden we tend daily. Yet every mature spiritual tradition emphasizes that sustained practice, not peak experiences, creates lasting transformation. Nothing is an accident in how Soyen Shaku structured his rules around the most ordinary aspects of daily life: waking, eating, speaking, sleeping, and interacting with others. He understood that these mundane activities, when performed with mindful attention, become gateways to the sacred. True spiritual practice doesn't require dramatic rituals or exotic techniques. It requires bringing complete presence to whatever we're already doing. The deeper teaching here shows us that discipline and freedom are not opposites, but partners. Soyen Shaku's rules didn't limit his spontaneity. They created the stable foundation from which genuine spontaneity could emerge. Like a jazz musician who practices scales daily in order to improvise freely, spiritual practitioners use discipline to create space for authentic expression. Consider how this applies to modern life. We often resist routine, seeing it as boring or restrictive. Yet Soyen Shaku's example reveals that conscious routine can become a form of moving meditation, transforming ordinary activities into opportunities for awakening. Each time we eat with awareness, speak with integrity, or transition mindfully between activities, we strengthen our capacity for presence. Look deeply at your own daily patterns. How much of your day is spent on autopilot, going through motions without genuine attention? Soyen Shaku's rules suggest that every moment offers an opportunity for practice. The way we wake up, the attention we bring to meals, the consistency of our sleep schedule, all become expressions of our spiritual commitment. Zen Master Yun Men taught, "Every day is a good day." This doesn't mean every day is pleasant, but that every day offers opportunities for awakening. Soyen Shaku's rules created a framework for recognizing and utilizing these opportunities. His practice wasn't separate from his life. It was the conscious living of his life. The integration of fearless attitude and loving heart in Soyen Shaku's approach reveals something profound about mature spirituality. Spiritual practice doesn't make us soft or passive. Rather, it develops both the courage to meet life's challenges directly and the tenderness to respond with compassion. This combination of strength and gentleness appears in every authentic spiritual teacher. His approach to speech, watching what he said and practicing what he spoke, addresses one of our most common spiritual challenges. How often do we speak ideals we don't live or make commitments we don't keep? Soyen Shaku's integrity between word and action prevented the internal conflict that weakens spiritual resolve. The Buddha said, "The path is not in the sky, the path is in the heart." Soyen Shaku's rules demonstrate that this path is walked through the most ordinary activities when they are performed with extraordinary presence. His daily routine became a continuous meditation, a way of remaining connected to awakened awareness throughout all activities. Tonight, as you consider your own daily rhythms, what would change if you approached routine activities as spiritual practice? Could your morning routine become a meditation? Could your interactions with others become opportunities for compassion? Could your relationship with food, sleep, and speech become expressions of mindful awareness? Soyen Shaku's example shows us that we don't need to wait for perfect conditions or extraordinary circumstances to deepen our spiritual practice. We can begin exactly where we are, with whatever daily activities already fill our schedule. The path to awakening runs directly through the center of ordinary life, transformed by the quality of attention we bring to each moment. As the Buddha taught, drop by drop is the water pot filled. Likewise, the wise one, gathering it little by little, fills oneself with good. Soyen Shaku understood that enlightenment is not a sudden explosion, but a gradual accumulation of mindful moments, each small practice adding to the foundation of awakened living. His 10 rules became his daily way of filling the water pot of wisdom, one conscious choice at a time. Let us continue on our journey with a teaching about the dangerous gap between conceptual understanding and lived experience. This is the story of the one-eyed monk and the silent debate. In ancient China, when traveling monks wandered from monastery to monastery seeking teachings and testing their understanding, a particular custom had developed among Zen communities. Before a wandering monk could receive lodging for the night, he had to engage in what was called Dharma combat, with either the abbot or a designated representative. This wasn't physical fighting, but a contest of spiritual wit and understanding, where profound questions and paradoxical answers revealed the depth of each participant's realization. At one renowned monastery nestled in bamboo forests, a travel-worn monk arrived as evening shadows began to lengthen across the courtyards. His robes were dusty from mountain paths, his straw sandals worn thin, but his eyes carried the alert brightness of someone genuinely seeking deeper understanding. The abbot, busy with evening duties, assigned his personal attendant to conduct the traditional Dharma encounter. This attendant had served the monastery faithfully for many years, though he possessed what others might consider a disadvantage. He had lost one eye in an accident during his youth. Despite this physical limitation, or perhaps because of the clarity it had brought to his inner vision, he had developed profound insight into the Buddha's teachings. When the two monks met in the monastery's formal reception hall, the traveling monk proposed something unusual. "Let us engage in silent debate," he suggested, gesturing with his hands to indicate they would communicate through gestures alone rather than words. Sometimes the deepest truths transcend language altogether. The attendant nodded agreement, and they began their wordless exchange. The wayfarer raised one finger toward the ceiling, holding it steady with an expression of calm confidence. Without hesitation, the attendant responded by raising two fingers. The traveling monk, seeming pleased by this response, then raised 3 fingers. At this, the attendant surprised him by making a tight fist and holding it firmly in the space between them. The traveling monk's confident expression faltered. For a moment, he stared at the clenched fist, his face showing confusion and something approaching alarm. Then, without attempting any further gestures, he bowed quickly and left the hall. Soon afterward, he found the abbot and spoke with obvious respect and disappointment. "Venerable Sir, your representative is far too advanced for me. I must continue my journey rather than presume to stay in your monastery tonight." The abbot raised his eyebrows with interest. "Please, tell me what transpired in your exchange." "Well," the traveler explained earnestly, "I began by holding up one finger to symbolize the Buddha, the awakened one who showed us the path to enlightenment. But your monk immediately responded with 2 fingers, indicating the Buddha and the Dharma, both the teacher and the teachings he offered. So I raised 3 fingers to represent the complete triple gem: the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, the community of practitioners. But then he held up a clenched fist to show that all 3 are actually one unified reality. His understanding is clearly beyond mine, so I must seek instruction elsewhere before I could be worthy of staying here." The abbot listened to this interpretation with growing surprise, for he knew his attendant's character well. As the traveling monk departed into the gathering dusk, the attendant himself appeared, visibly agitated and breathing hard from running. "Where is that insolent rascal?" he demanded, his single eye blazing with indignation. "I've been looking everywhere for him. The nerve of that man. I've never encountered such rudeness disguised as spiritual inquiry." "What exactly happened?" the abbot asked, genuinely curious now about what had transpired between these 2 very different interpretations of the same event. "First," the attendant explained, his voice rising with remembered offense, "he insulted me by holding up one finger to indicate that I had only one eye. Can you imagine? Here I thought we were engaging in spiritual discourse, but he immediately drew attention to my physical limitation. Determined to remain polite despite such crudeness, I held up 2 fingers to acknowledge that he was blessed with 2 eyes. I was trying to show that I bore him no ill will for his thoughtless comment." The attendant paused to catch his breath, his agitation increasing as he continued. But the scoundrel wasn't satisfied with that insult. Next, he held up 3 fingers to rub it in further, indicating that between the two of us, there were only 3 eyes total. He was deliberately emphasizing our difference, making sure I couldn't forget my disability. That's when I'd had enough. I made a fist because I was about to hit him for his persistent rudeness. But the coward saw what was coming and ran off before I could teach him proper manners. The abbot stood in stunned silence, contemplating this remarkable demonstration of how 2 people could participate in identical events while inhabiting completely different realities. The Buddha taught, "We see the world not as it is, but as we are." This profound truth reveals itself in the complete misunderstanding between our 2 monks, each of whom experienced the exact same gestures while living in entirely different interpretations of reality. Why do we so often project our own concerns, insecurities, and assumptions onto neutral situations? Zen Buddhism points to what it calls the 8 worldly winds: praise and blame, pleasure and pain, gain and loss, fame and disgrace. These psychological forces create internal weather systems that color our perception of everything around us. The attendant's sensitivity about his missing eye created a filter through which every gesture became a personal attack. His past experiences of being judged or pitied for his appearance had created such a strong interpretive framework that he couldn't perceive any other possible meaning in the traveler's hand signals. Similarly, the traveling monk's spiritual preoccupations caused him to see profound Dharma teachings in what were actually expressions of wounded feelings and growing anger. His framework of seeking enlightened instruction made him interpret increasingly aggressive gestures as increasingly sophisticated wisdom. Look deeply at your own patterns of interpretation. How often do your current worries, past hurts, or persistent hopes cause you to misread situations completely? Perhaps someone's distracted behavior becomes evidence they don't like you when they're actually concerned about a family member's health. Maybe a colleague's helpful suggestion feels like criticism because you're insecure about your performance. This ancient wisdom illuminates how our internal state creates our external experience. Both monks were sincere in their perceptions, yet both were fundamentally mistaken about what was actually happening. Neither was lying or deliberately misinterpreting. They were simply seeing through the lens of their own psychological conditioning. The story points us toward a crucial question. How can we develop the capacity to see situations more clearly, less filtered through our personal concerns and interpretations? Zen practice offers several approaches to this challenge. First is what's called don't know mind. Maintaining openness to multiple interpretations, rather than immediately settling on the one that confirms our existing beliefs or fears. When someone acts in a way that triggers our interpretation, can we pause and consider other possible explanations? Second is mindfulness of our own emotional states. The attendant might have noticed his rising sensitivity about his appearance and recognized how this was coloring his perception. The traveler might have observed his eagerness to find profound teachings and questioned whether he was seeing wisdom where none existed. Zen Master Bankei taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." This teaching invites us to examine the very mind that creates these interpretations, rather than constantly trying to figure out the correct interpretation of external events. The Buddha said, "Hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is a law eternal." If the attendant had met the traveler's perceived insults with curiosity rather than defensiveness, If the traveler had questioned his assumptions about enlightened behavior, their encounter might have become a genuine teaching for both. Tonight, as you replay conversations and interactions from your day, can you notice how your own concerns and sensitivities might have shaped your interpretations? Can you sense the difference between what actually happened and the meaning your mind added to those events? As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. By understanding how our internal weather creates our external storms, we discover the possibility of clear seeing that serves both wisdom and compassion. Let us now explore a story about acceptance, natural cycles, and what true prosperity means. This is the teaching of the rich man and the master's blessing. A wealthy merchant had built a vast fortune through years of shrewd business dealings and careful investments. His family owned multiple properties, controlled trade routes, and wielded considerable influence throughout the region. As he aged, the merchant became increasingly concerned about ensuring his family's continued prosperity long after his death. Having heard of a renowned Zen master whose wisdom was said to transcend ordinary understanding, the merchant decided to commission something special. He approached the master with a request that seemed both generous and practical. "Master," he said, bowing respectfully while displaying his finest robes and jewelry, "I would like to commission you to write something profound that will encourage the prosperity of my family for generations to come, something that my descendants can treasure and draw inspiration from long after I am gone. Money is no object. I simply want the most powerful blessing you can provide." The master listened quietly to this request, observing the merchant's obvious wealth and the sincere concern he felt for his family's future. After a moment of contemplation, he nodded his agreement and asked for a large piece of the finest paper. The merchant watched eagerly as the master prepared his brush and ink with ceremonial care. He expected elaborate calligraphy, perhaps ancient wisdom about accumulating wealth, or powerful mantras that would ensure his family's continued success in business and life. The master's reputation suggested that whatever he wrote would be both beautiful and profound. With simple, elegant strokes, the master wrote just 7 words. Father dies, son dies, grandson dies. When the merchant read what had been written, his face flushed red with anger and disbelief. This was not at all what he had expected or requested. "Master!" he exclaimed, his voice rising with indignation. "I asked you to write something that would bring happiness and prosperity to my family for generations. Instead, you give me this depressing message about death. Why do you give me something so depressing like this?" The master looked at him with calm, compassionate eyes and began to explain the deeper meaning behind what might appear to be a morbid prediction. "Consider carefully what I have written," the master said gently. "If your son should die before you, this would bring unbearable grief to your family. Parents are not meant to outlive their children. Such loss creates a wound that never fully heals. If your grandson should die before your son, this too would bring tremendous sorrow to your family and disrupt the natural flow of life." The merchant began to listen more carefully, sensing there was something deeper in the master's words than he had initially understood. "But if your family continues, generation after generation, with each death occurring in the natural order I have described, this represents the ideal course of life. This is the pattern that brings the least suffering and the greatest harmony. This natural succession, where each generation has time to live fully before passing responsibility to the next, is true happiness and genuine prosperity. As the Buddha taught, of all things, impermanence is the most sacred. This ancient wisdom illuminates why accepting the natural order of life and death creates more genuine peace than any accumulation of material wealth ever could. Why do we resist the fundamental reality that all things, including our own lives and those of our loved ones, are temporary? Zen Buddhism reveals that much of our suffering comes from fighting against impermanence rather than finding peace within its natural rhythms. The merchant's initial understanding of prosperity was limited to material accumulation, wealth, property, and influence that could be passed down through generations. But the master pointed to a deeper form of prosperity, the blessing of a family that experiences life and death in harmony with natural order rather than in tragic disruption of it. Consider how different our relationship to mortality becomes when we see death not as failure or tragedy, but as the natural conclusion of a life fully lived. The Master's blessing wasn't morbid. It was recognition that the greatest gift we can wish for our families is that each generation has the opportunity to live completely before making way for the next. This teaching also reveals the limitation of trying to control the future through accumulation of resources. The merchant wanted to ensure his family's prosperity through external means, but the master suggested that true prosperity comes from accepting life's fundamental conditions rather than attempting to transcend them. In our modern context, we often measure family success by material legacy, the wealth we leave behind, the properties we pass down, the financial security we provide. But how often do we consider the emotional and spiritual legacy of a family that understands and accepts life's natural rhythms? The Buddha said, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence." This teaching reminds us that even while we work diligently to create good conditions for ourselves and our loved ones, the ultimate prosperity comes from understanding and accepting the temporary nature of all achievements. Look deeply at your own hopes and fears for your family's future. How much energy goes toward trying to control outcomes that are ultimately beyond our control? What would it mean to wish for your loved ones not immunity from life's natural processes, but wisdom and acceptance in meeting them? The Master's blessing contains a profound recognition. The alternative to natural order is not preservation, but tragedy. By wishing for the normal sequence of generational transition, he was wishing for the absence of the premature deaths and disrupted cycles that create the deepest forms of suffering. Tonight, as you consider what you most hope for your family and loved ones, can you remember the Master's wisdom? Can you see that the greatest blessing might not be the avoidance of mortality, but the grace to experience it in harmony with natural order? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. The Master's 7 words brought the merchant face to face with the ultimate reality that no amount of wealth can change: our participation in the endless cycle of birth, life, and death that characterizes all existence. True prosperity lies not in escaping this cycle, but in dancing gracefully within it. Now, let us explore a story about the patient path to wisdom and the paradox of urgent seeking. This is the teaching of the one-eyed student. In a peaceful valley surrounded by cherry trees, a young man had heard stories of a renowned Zen master whose students achieved profound realization through diligent practice. Filled with spiritual ambition and eager to transform his life, the young seeker traveled many days to reach the master's monastery, his mind burning with determination to attain enlightenment as quickly as possible. When he finally arrived, dusty from the road and bright with enthusiasm, he immediately sought an audience with the master. The old teacher received him in a simple room overlooking a garden, where monks moved slowly among vegetables and flowers, their movements unhurried and graceful. "Master," the young man said, bowing earnestly, "I have come to study Zen with complete dedication. I am willing to work harder than anyone has ever worked before. Tell me, if I apply myself with absolute diligence and unwavering effort, how long will it take for me to find Zen?" The master sat quietly for a long moment, watching the young man's eager face, noting the tension in his shoulders and the urgent energy that radiated from his posture. Finally, he replied thoughtfully, 10 years. The student's eyes widened with surprise. 10 years seemed like such a long time when enlightenment felt so urgent, so necessary for his happiness. Surely, with the right approach, the process could be accelerated. "But master," he said, leaning forward intently, "what if I work very, very hard and really apply myself to learn fast? What if I meditate longer than the other students, study more texts, practice more intensively? How long then?" The master considered this with the same careful attention, then replied calmly, "Well, 20 years. The young man's face showed his confusion and growing frustration. This made no sense at all. How could greater effort result in slower progress? Perhaps the master hadn't understood the depth of his commitment. "But master, I don't think you understand how serious I am about this," he said, his voice rising slightly with urgency. "What if I really, really work at it? What if I dedicate every waking moment to practice, sleep only when absolutely necessary, and push myself beyond all normal limits? Surely then I could achieve realization much faster. How long would it take then?" 30 years, the master replied without hesitation. By now, the student was completely bewildered and increasingly agitated. Nothing the master said made sense according to his understanding of how learning worked. In every other area of life, music, martial arts, scholarship, harder work produced faster results. Why should spiritual practice be different? "Master, I do not understand," he said, no longer able to hide his disappointment and confusion. "Each time that I say I will work harder, you say it will take me longer. This seems completely backwards. Why do you say that?" The master's expression became gentle and compassionate, like a father explaining something important to a beloved child who was old enough to understand. "When you have one eye on the goal, you only have one eye on the path," the master explained quietly. Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. What emerges from this story is a profound teaching about the nature of spiritual progress and the paradox of goal-oriented seeking. Why does intense goal fixation actually slow our spiritual development? Zen Buddhism reveals several ways that excessive focus on attainment creates obstacles to realization. First is the problem of divided attention. When part of our consciousness is constantly measuring progress toward an imagined destination, we cannot fully inhabit the present moment practices that actually cultivate awakening. Consider learning to play a musical instrument. If you spend half your practice time obsessing about when you'll be good enough to perform publicly, that energy isn't available for the careful attention to finger placement, rhythm, and tone that develops skill. The music emerges through complete absorption in the present moment relationship between musician and instrument, not through anxious projection toward future competence. Second is what Zen calls gaining mind, the subtle grasping that turns spiritual practice into a transaction. When we practice meditation to get enlightenment, study texts to accumulate wisdom, or cultivate compassion to become better people, we're approaching the path as consumers rather than participants. This gaining mind creates a fundamental split between who we think we are now and who we imagine we need to become. The Buddha said, "What you are looking for is where you are looking from." This profound teaching points to the very heart of the Master's lesson. Zen is not something we attain, but something we recognize. It's not a destination we reach, but the very awareness with which we walk the path. This ancient wisdom illuminates why urgent spiritual seeking often becomes self-defeating. When we're frantically pursuing enlightenment, we're operating from the assumption that our present experience is somehow inadequate or incomplete. But Zen teaches that the seeking mind itself is the very awareness we're seeking to find. Look deeply at your own experience of learning and growth. Haven't your most profound insights often come when you weren't actively trying to have insights? Perhaps while walking in nature, washing dishes, or simply sitting quietly without agenda. These moments of natural awareness reveal what the Master was pointing toward, that wisdom emerges when we stop dividing our attention between here and there, now and then. Zen Master Huang Po taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." This teaching invites us to examine our relationship to spiritual practice itself. Are we practicing to become someone different, or are we practicing to recognize who we already are? Are we walking the path to get somewhere else, or are we discovering that the path itself is the destination? The student's error wasn't his desire for realization, but his assumption that it existed somewhere other than in his present moment experience. Each time he proposed working harder, he was actually moving further from the natural awareness that practice reveals. Like trying to catch your own shadow by running faster, the more urgently you chase it, the more it seems to flee. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called just sitting. Meditation without gaining mind, without agenda, without dividing attention between practice and goal. This doesn't mean we become passive or lose our dedication. Instead, we bring wholehearted attention to each moment of practice, allowing insights to emerge naturally rather than forcing them through willful effort. Consider how this teaching might apply to other areas of your life. Perhaps in relationships, where trying too hard to be loved often pushes others away, or in creative work, where forcing inspiration typically produces stilted results, while relaxed attention allows natural creativity to flow. Tonight, as you notice your mind racing toward imagined destinations, the person you want to become, the peace you want to find, the understanding you want to achieve, can you remember the Master's teaching? Can you gently return both eyes to the path, discovering that the journey itself contains everything you thought you were seeking at its end? Buddha spoke of this when he said, "There is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way." By walking the path with undivided attention, we discover that what we thought lay at its end was present in every step. Now let us explore a story about the power of belief and the destiny we create through faith itself. This is the tale of the general and the coin that revealed truth. A Japanese general faced an impossible situation. His army was greatly outnumbered by enemy forces. The terrain favored his opponents, and by every conventional measure of military strategy, the coming battle should result in devastating defeat. Yet something deep within him remained convinced that victory was possible. Perhaps it was intuition, perhaps it was desperate hope, but he felt certain that his cause was just, and his troops, though fewer in number, possessed a fighting spirit that could overcome the odds. The problem was his soldiers. They could count as well as he could, and they had eyes to see the massive force arrayed against them. Fear rippled through their ranks like a contagion. Doubt clouded their faces. Whispered conversations filled with pessimism spread through the camp, and the general could sense that their morale was crumbling before the battle had even begun. He knew that an army convinced of its own defeat would indeed be defeated, regardless of any other factors. Technical skill, superior weapons, even numerical advantage means nothing when soldiers have already surrendered in their hearts. But an army that truly believed in its victory could accomplish seemingly impossible things through the sheer force of that conviction. On the morning of the battle, as they marched toward their destiny, the general led his troops to a small religious shrine that stood beside the road. This was a place where countless warriors had stopped over the centuries to pray before facing uncertain fate. The general gathered his men around him and led them in earnest prayer, asking for divine blessing and protection in the coming fight. When the prayers were finished, the general reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple coin. He held it high so that every soldier could see it clearly. "My brothers," he called out, his voice carrying across the assembled ranks, "we have prayed, and now we will let heaven itself reveal our destiny. I will toss this coin into the air. If it lands heads, we are fated to win this battle. If it lands tails, we are destined to lose. Let us discover what the gods have decided for us." The soldiers pressed closer, their breathing shallow with anticipation. Everything seemed to depend on this single moment, this one flip of metal spinning through the morning air. The general tossed the coin high, and every eye followed its arc as it rose, hung suspended for an instant against the sky, then fell back, down to earth. The coin landed and lay still in the dust. It was heads. A cheer erupted from the troops that could probably be heard for miles. Soldiers who had been grim and fearful moments before now laughed with joy and embraced each other with renewed confidence. The gods had spoken. Victory was assured. Their cause was blessed by heaven itself. Filled with this divine confidence, the soldiers attacked their enemies with such fierce determination and coordinated power that they achieved exactly what the coin had predicted. Against all odds, they won a decisive victory, routing forces much larger than their own and securing a triumph that would be remembered for generations. After the battle, as the general walked among his celebrating troops, his lieutenant approached him with wonder in his eyes. "General," the lieutenant said, "what an incredible thing. The coin revealed our true destiny, just as you said it would. Surely no human power can change what heaven has decreed." "You are absolutely right," the general replied with a knowing smile. He reached into his pocket and withdrew the coin, holding it so his lieutenant could examine it closely. "No one can change destiny." The lieutenant looked at the coin and gasped. Both sides showed heads. The Buddha once said, "All that we are is the result of what we have thought. The mind is everything. What we think, we become." Here we discover the profound truth that destiny is not something that happens to us, but something we create through the power of our own beliefs and expectations. Why do we so readily assume that fate is beyond our influence, when our own minds play such a crucial role in shaping what unfolds? Zen Buddhism teaches that while we cannot control all external circumstances, we have tremendous power over the internal conditions that determine how we respond to whatever arises. The general understood something profound about human psychology and the nature of reality itself. He knew that his soldiers' belief in victory was more important than their numerical disadvantage. He recognized that confidence, determination, and fighting spirit could overcome superior numbers when those qualities were genuinely present. But here's the deeper teaching. The general didn't simply manipulate his troops through deception. He created the conditions that allowed their natural courage and strength to emerge. The soldiers possessed the ability to fight brilliantly all along. They simply needed to believe in themselves and their cause. Consider your own relationship with destiny and possibility. How often do you assume that outcomes are predetermined, that success or failure is beyond your influence? The general's two-headed coin represents the power we all possess to tip the scales in favor of positive outcomes through the quality of our engagement with life. This doesn't mean we can control everything through positive thinking, or that believing in something makes it automatically true. The soldiers still had to fight the battle. They still had to demonstrate actual skill and courage. But their belief in victory created the psychological conditions that allowed their best qualities to manifest. In Zen practice, we learn to work skillfully with both effort and surrender, both intention and acceptance. We recognize that while we cannot dictate specific outcomes, we can profoundly influence the energy and attention we bring to any situation. This quality of engagement often determines whether we experience success or failure, regardless of external circumstances. Zen master Huang Po taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." The general was wise enough to see that his soldiers' thoughts about the battle were more influential than their thoughts about their numerical disadvantage. He worked with the reality of psychology rather than fighting against it. Look deeply at the various challenges and opportunities in your own life. Where might you be carrying a tails mentality, assuming defeat before you fully engaged, focusing on obstacles rather than possibilities, letting fear determine your level of effort? And where might you need to create your own two-headed coin, a practice or perspective that consistently orients you toward positive engagement regardless of circumstances? The Buddha taught, "We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world." This isn't magical thinking, but recognition of the creative power of consciousness itself. When we approach situations with genuine confidence, clarity, and commitment, we often discover capabilities we didn't know we possessed. Tonight, as you consider the battles you're facing and the outcomes you're hoping for, can you find your own version of the general's wisdom? Can you create internal conditions that support your highest possibilities rather than your deepest fears? Can you recognize that while you cannot control destiny, you have profound influence over the beliefs and attitudes that shape how destiny unfolds through you? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. The general's confidence lit the flame of belief in every soldier's heart. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is create the conditions that allow others and ourselves to discover the strength that was there all along. Let us now turn to a story about the nature of identity and the mystery of consciousness itself. This is the tale of Chuang Tzu and the butterfly. The ancient Taoist sage Chuang Tzu lived simply, spending his days in quiet contemplation of the natural world and the deeper mysteries of existence. He was known for his profound insights into the nature of reality and his ability to see beyond the surface appearances that convince most people they understand the world around them. One afternoon, after a morning of walking through bamboo groves and observing the play of light on water, Chuang Tzu lay down beneath a flowering tree to rest. The gentle warmth of the sun, the soft sound of wind through leaves, and the fragrance of spring blossoms created the perfect conditions for deep relaxation. As he settled into this peaceful state, his consciousness gradually shifted from ordinary waking awareness into the mysterious realm of dreams. In his dream, something extraordinary occurred. Chuang Tzu found himself transformed into a beautiful butterfly, his human form completely forgotten. He fluttered gracefully from flower to flower, his delicate wings catching the sunlight as he moved through a world of pure color and sensation. There was no memory of being a philosopher, no awareness of human concerns or intellectual pursuits. He was simply and completely a butterfly, experiencing the world through compound eyes, navigating by instinct, living entirely in the present moment of flight and discovery. The butterfly that was Chuang Tzu felt utterly free, unburdened by the heavy thoughts and complex worries that typically occupy human consciousness. There was only the joy of movement, the sweetness of nectar, the warm touch of sun on delicate wings. This wasn't a dream about being a butterfly while knowing he was really a man. It was the complete experience of butterfly existence, with no trace of human identity remaining. Then, as suddenly as the transformation had occurred, Chuang Tzu awakened. He found himself lying beneath the tree, the afternoon sun having moved across the sky during his sleep. His human body felt solid and familiar, his philosopher's mind immediately active with questions and observations. The vivid dream began to fade as waking consciousness reasserted itself. But instead of simply dismissing the experience as an unusual dream, Chuang Tzu found himself puzzled by a profound question that challenged everything he thought he knew about identity and reality. He sat up slowly, still feeling the lingering sensation of flight, and pondered the implications of what had just occurred. Was I just now a man dreaming I was a butterfly? He wondered aloud. Or am I perhaps a butterfly now dreaming that I am a man? The question wasn't merely playful speculation. It pointed to something fundamental about the nature of consciousness and identity that most people never consider. If the experience of being a butterfly had felt completely real and authentic while it was happening, how could he be certain that his current experience of being human was any more real or permanent? Buddha's wisdom teaches us all conditioned existence is impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence. This ancient teaching illuminates the fluid nature of identity and the importance of not clinging too tightly to any particular sense of self. Why do we assume that our current state of consciousness represents the ultimate reality? Zen Buddhism points to our tendency to take our present experience as fixed and absolute, when in fact, all states of consciousness, waking, dreaming, sleeping, are temporary and constantly changing phenomena arising in the vast space of awareness. Chuang Tzu's question challenges our basic assumptions about who and what we are. During the dream, the butterfly identity felt completely authentic and real. Upon waking, the human identity seems equally authentic and real. But which one represents his true nature? Or is perhaps the question itself based on a false premise? Consider your own experience of identity throughout different states of consciousness. Are you the same you when you're dreaming as when you're awake? What about when you're deeply absorbed in an activity, or in deep meditation, or in moments of creative flow when self-consciousness disappears entirely? Which of these states represents your real identity? In Zen practice, we explore the possibility that all these different identities are simply temporary appearances in consciousness, like waves on the ocean or clouds in the sky. The waves are real, but they're not separate from the ocean. The clouds are real, but they're not separate from the sky. Similarly, all our various identities and experiences are real, but they're not separate from the underlying awareness in which they appear. The butterfly dream reveals something profound about the nature of transformation and possibility. If Chuang-Tzu could completely become a butterfly in his dream consciousness, what does that suggest about the fixed boundaries we imagine exist around our identity? How solid are the limitations we place on ourselves based on our current circumstances or self-concept? Zen Master Dogen taught, "To study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self." Chuang-Tzu's experience points to this same teaching. The more deeply we investigate the nature of selfhood, the more we discover that our fixed ideas about identity begin to dissolve. The Buddha said, "Form is emptiness, emptiness is form." The man and the butterfly are both real and both empty of permanent, independent existence. They are temporary formations in the field of consciousness, each authentic while present, each naturally dissolving to make way for whatever comes next. Look deeply at your own sense of identity. How much of who you think you are is based on roles, memories, and concepts that are actually quite fluid and changeable? What would remain if you let go of your attachment to being any particular type of person? Tonight, as you move between waking consciousness and the dream state, can you remember Chuang-Tzu's profound question? Can you hold your identity lightly, recognizing that whether you're experiencing yourself as human or butterfly, worker or dreamer, the awareness in which all these experiences arise remains constant and unbound? As the Buddha observed, everything is impermanent. Strive on with awareness. The man dreams of being a butterfly. The butterfly dreams of being a man. But the dreaming itself, the pure capacity for experience, remains as vast and free as the sky, untouched by whatever temporary forms dance within it. Let us now turn to a tale about the thin boundary between heaven and hell within our own hearts. This is the story of the samurai and the gates. In feudal Japan, a battle-hardened warrior named Nobushige sought out the renowned Zen master Hakuin. The samurai's armor bore the scars of countless conflicts, and his eyes carried the weight of a man who had seen too much violence. He approached the master's simple dwelling with a question that had been burning in his mind since his last campaign. "Master Hakuin," Nobushige said, bowing stiffly in his heavy armor, "I have spent my life fighting for my lord, facing death countless times. Tell me truthfully, is there really a paradise and a hell awaiting us after death?" Hakuin looked up from his tea, studying the warrior with penetrating eyes. "Who are you to ask such a question?" he inquired calmly. "I am a samurai," Nobushige replied with pride, straightening his shoulders. "I serve my lord with honor and have never retreated from battle." Hakuin's expression suddenly shifted to one of disdain. "You, a soldier!" he exclaimed with a dismissive laugh. What kind of ruler would have you as his guard? Look at yourself. Your face looks like that of a common beggar, weathered and crude. How could someone so lowly claim to be a protector of nobility? The words struck Nobushiga like physical blows. His face flushed red with anger, and his hand instinctively moved to the hilt of his sword. The insult to his honor was unbearable. "So, you have a sword," Hakuin continued, his voice dripping with mockery. "Your weapon is probably much too dull to cut off my head. I doubt you could slice through a rice paper screen, let alone defend anyone of importance." Unable to contain his rage any longer, Nobushiga began to draw his sword, the steel singing as it emerged from its scabbard. His entire body trembled with fury. His vision narrowed to focus solely on this insolent monk who dared to question his honor. At that precise moment, as the blade caught the afternoon light, Hakuin spoke with sudden clarity. "Here, open the gates of hell!" The words pierced through Nobushiga's rage like an arrow finding its target. In that instant, he saw himself clearly, consumed by anger, ready to kill over wounded pride, his mind clouded by fury. He understood that hell was not some distant realm, but the very state he inhabited in that moment. The samurai's hand froze on his sword as recognition dawned across his features. Slowly, with great reverence, Nobushiga sheathed his sword and bowed deeply before the master, his anger transformed into profound gratitude. "Here open the gates of paradise," Hakuin said gently, his voice now filled with compassion. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. What emerges from this story is a startling revelation about the geography of our inner world. Heaven and hell are not distant destinations, but present moment experiences we create through the quality of our consciousness. Why do we so easily find ourselves at the gates of hell? Zen Buddhism points to the three poisons that cloud our minds: greed, hatred, and delusion. When Nobushiga's pride was wounded, hatred arose instantly, transforming a peaceful afternoon into a realm of suffering. His entire reality shifted from curiosity about the afterlife to murderous rage in mere moments. The deeper teaching here shows us that we carry within ourselves the capacity for both states. Paradise and hell are not places we go to after death. They are experiences we inhabit while living. Each moment offers us the choice between the hell of reactivity and the paradise of awareness. Consider how often throughout your day similar transformations occur. A critical email arrives, and suddenly your peaceful morning becomes a realm of anxiety and resentment. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and the spaciousness of your drive contracts into a tight knot of irritation. A thoughtless comment from a colleague, and your contentment dissolves into hurt feelings and defensive thoughts. In Zen practice, we cultivate the capacity to recognize these moments of transition. Like Nobushige drawing his sword, we learn to catch ourselves at the very moment we're about to enter hell through our reactions. This recognition itself becomes the key that opens the gates of paradise. Zen master Huangpo taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." When we're caught in reactivity, we're rejecting the present moment, the master's teaching, the opportunity for awakening in favor of our thoughts about how things should be. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." Hakuin's apparent insults were not cruelty but compassion in disguise. By provoking Nobushige's anger so skillfully, he showed the warrior exactly what he needed to see. that hell is a state of mind we enter through our own choices. This teaching invites us to examine our own triggers. What words or situations instantly transport us to hell? Perhaps it's feeling unappreciated at work, being misunderstood by family, or facing unexpected challenges. Each of these experiences offers the same choice Nobushige faced. Will we draw our sword or recognize the teaching? Tonight, as you notice irritation arising in response to some frustration, can you remember Hakuin's lesson? Can you recognize the moment when you're about to enter hell through your reactions and instead choose the paradise of awareness? As the Buddha taught, what we think, we become. In each moment, we are either opening the gates of hell through unconscious reactivity or opening the gates of paradise through mindful presence. Our next story reveals how liberation comes not from achieving something new, but from recognizing what was never born and can never die. This is the teaching of freedom from birth and death. In a quiet monastery garden where cherry blossoms drifted on the spring breeze, a dedicated student named Goshu approached the wise Zen master Yue. For years, Goshu had been practicing meditation, studying texts, and following all the prescribed methods of spiritual development. Yet despite his sincere efforts, he felt no closer to the enlightenment he desperately sought. Goshu bowed respectfully before his teacher, his face showing the strain of prolonged spiritual seeking. Master, I have been studying Zen for many years, following every instruction, sitting in meditation daily, reading the ancient texts, but I have not yet succeeded. I feel as lost as when I began. Please give me some guidance. What am I missing? What more must I do? Yue looked at his earnest student with compassion, seeing the weight of spiritual ambition that had become a burden rather than a path to freedom. He understood that Goshu's very effort to achieve enlightenment had become the obstacle to recognizing his inherent awakeness. There is no secret trick to Zen study, Yue said simply. It's just a matter of freedom from birth and death. Goshu's brow furrowed with confusion. This answer seemed to make his quest even more daunting. Master, how does one pass through birth and death to freedom? That sounds like the most difficult task of all. If I cannot even quiet my mind for a few minutes, how can I transcend birth and death? Yui's eyes brightened, and he raised his voice with sudden intensity. Your every passing thought is birth and death. At these words, something shifted dramatically in Goshu's understanding. Like a veil suddenly lifted, he saw that what he had been seeking as some future attainment was actually the very nature of his present experience. The constant arising and passing away of thoughts, sensations, and emotions. This endless flow was not something to escape, but the very freedom he had been pursuing. Goshu went into ecstasy, feeling as if he had put down a heavy burden he didn't even realize he had been carrying. The relief was profound and immediate. All his years of struggling to become something special dissolved into the recognition that he had never been anything other than the aware space in which all experience appears and disappears. As the Buddha observed, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. What emerges from this story is the recognition that we suffer not because we lack something, but because we don't recognize the freedom that is our fundamental nature. Why do we carry the heavy burden of spiritual becoming? Zen Buddhism points to our identification with the content of consciousness rather than consciousness itself. We mistake ourselves for the stream of thoughts, emotions, and sensations, instead of recognizing ourselves as the aware space in which this stream flows. Every thought that arises is born. Every thought that fades away dies. Every emotion emerges from nowhere and dissolves back into nowhere. Every sensation appears and disappears. This constant birth and death happening in awareness is not a problem to solve, but the very movement of life itself. The deeper understanding here reveals that what we call birth and death are simply names we give to the natural flowing of experience. When we identify with the flow, we suffer the anxiety of constant change. When we recognize ourselves as the awareness in which the flow appears, we discover unshakable peace. Zen Master Huangpo taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." This points to the extraordinary fact that the enlightenment we seek is not hidden in special states, but in the ordinary awareness that knows every state. The same awareness that knows anxiety also knows peace. The same awareness that knows confusion also knows clarity. The Buddha said, "In the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. Our spiritual seeking often creates the very problem it attempts to solve by imagining that some states of consciousness are spiritual while others are mundane. Consider how much energy you invest in trying to have better thoughts, more peaceful emotions, or more pleasant experiences. Each effort to improve the content of consciousness reinforces the belief that you are that content, rather than the awareness that witnesses it all with equal presence. In Japanese Zen, there is a teaching called just sitting, or shikantaza. This practice involves recognizing that the sitting itself is enlightenment, rather than a method to achieve enlightenment. Similarly, your current awareness, exactly as it is the freedom you seek, rather than a stepping stone to freedom. Tonight, as thoughts arise and pass away in your awareness, can you recognize the birth and death that UEA pointed to? Can you see that you are not the thoughts that come and go, but the unchanging awareness in which they appear? As the Buddha taught, all conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence. The salvation is not in perfecting the conditioned, but in recognizing the unconditioned awareness that you already are. Let us now turn to a tale about the nature of faith and self-doubt. This is the story of the wishing tree. A poor man walks slowly through a dense forest, his shoulders heavy with worry, bills unpaid, relationships strained, dreams deferred. Each step seemed to echo with the weight of his many troubles. The canopy above filtered the sunlight into gentle patterns on the forest floor, but he noticed none of this beauty. His mind churned endlessly through his problems, each thought leading to another worry, another reason why his life felt so difficult. Exhausted from walking and thinking, he stopped to rest against what appeared to be an ordinary tree. Its trunk was wide and welcoming, its bark smooth against his back. As he leaned there, catching his breath, he realized how thirsty he had become. "I wish I had something to drink," he murmured to himself. Instantly, as if materializing from thin air, a cup of cool, clear water appeared in his hand. He stared at it in disbelief, turning the cup this way and that, examining it for some trick or illusion. The water looked pure, inviting. Tentatively, he brought it to his lips and drank. It was the most refreshing water he had ever tasted, cool and sweet, exactly what his parched throat needed. That was Strange, he said aloud, but his stomach chose that moment to growl with hunger. Almost without thinking, he wished for food. A simple but nourishing meal appeared before him on a wooden plate. Fresh bread, ripe fruit, and vegetables that looked as if they had just been harvested. The aroma made his mouth water. He ate slowly, marveling at each bite. "My wishes are being granted," he whispered in amazement. The realization sent a thrill through his entire body. "Well then," he said with growing excitement, "I wish for a beautiful home of my own." Before his eyes, in the meadow just beyond the tree, a magnificent house materialized. It was everything he had ever dreamed of. Spacious rooms filled with light, comfortable furnishings, gardens blooming with flowers. His heart raced with joy as he stood and approached his new home. "If I have such a house," he reasoned, "I'll need help to maintain it." He wished for servants, and immediately several kind-faced people appeared, bowing respectfully and asking how they might serve him. The man laughed with delight, hardly believing his incredible fortune. And what good is a beautiful home without someone special to share it with? He wondered aloud. He wished for a beautiful, loving, intelligent woman to be his companion. A radiant woman appeared beside him, her eyes warm with affection, her smile gentle and knowing. But as she took his hand, something shifted in the man's mind. The rational voice that had whispered doubts throughout his life suddenly grew louder. "Wait a minute," he said, stepping back from the woman.
This is ridiculous. I'm not this lucky. Things like this don't happen to people like me. This can't be real.
As the words left his mouth, everything began to fade. The woman's loving smile dissolved first, then the servants, then the beautiful house, and finally, even the simple meal he had enjoyed. He found himself alone again, leaning against what now seemed like an ordinary tree, with nothing but his original troubles for company. He shook his head knowingly. "I knew it," he muttered, and walked away through the forest, his mind immediately returning to the familiar patterns of worry and complaint that had occupied him before. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding the creative power of belief and the self-sabotaging nature of doubt. Why do we so readily dismiss the good that comes into our lives? Zen Buddhism points to a deeply conditioned pattern in the human mind, the tendency to trust our limitations more than our possibilities. We become so familiar with struggle, so identified with our problems, that abundance feels foreign, even threatening to our sense of self. Consider how often throughout your day you might receive unexpected kindness, notice surprising beauty, or encounter opportunities that could transform your circumstances. How quickly do you dismiss these gifts as coincidence, luck, or too good to be true? This reflexive doubt often causes us to literally walk away from the very blessings we've been seeking. The wishing tree represents the responsive universe that Zen teaches us about, reality that mirrors back our deepest beliefs about what we deserve and what's possible. When we approach life with trust and openness, we often discover resources and opportunities that were always available but previously invisible to us. When we approach with cynicism and self-doubt, these same possibilities seem to vanish. The man in the story had access to everything he needed, but his conditioning told him that someone like him couldn't possibly be worthy of such gifts. His belief in his own limitations became more powerful than the evidence of his senses. This is the tragedy of self-doubt. It causes us to abandon the very solutions to our problems. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the balance between accepting our inherent worthiness while remaining open to growth. The man under the tree couldn't hold both truths simultaneously, that he was worthy of good things and that positive change was possible in his life. In our modern context, we encounter wishing trees constantly. The colleague who offers genuine friendship, but we assume they have ulterior motives. The job opportunity that seems perfect, but we convince ourselves we're not qualified. The romantic relationship that feels too good to be true, so we sabotage it before it can disappoint us. Each time we choose familiar limitation over unfamiliar possibility, we walk away from our own wishing tree. The Buddha taught, doubt everything, find your own light. But there's a crucial distinction between the doubt that leads to wisdom and the doubt that leads to self-defeat. Wise doubt questions assumptions and seeks truth. Self-defeating doubt assumes the worst about ourselves and our possibilities, then treats these assumptions as facts. Zen practice invites us to notice when we're dismissing good fortune, abundance, or love simply because it doesn't match our habitual story about ourselves. Can we remain open to the possibility that we might be more deserving, more capable, more lovable than our conditioning suggests? Tonight, as you reflect on the day's experiences, can you identify moments when you might have walked away from your own wishing tree? Perhaps a compliment you dismissed, an opportunity you assumed wasn't meant for you, or a moment of joy you cut short because it felt too good to last. What would it mean to trust in your worthiness to receive life's gifts? As the Buddha observed, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. The wishing tree's magic isn't diminished by granting wishes, it's fulfilled by them. And our capacity to receive life's blessings isn't diminished by accepting them, it's expanded. Now, let us explore a story about recognition and the wisdom hidden in plain sight. This is the lesson of the visitor and the holy man. Word had spread throughout the countryside about a remarkable holy man who possessed extraordinary wisdom and spiritual power. People said he could answer any question, solve any problem, and provide guidance that would transform the most troubled life. He lived, according to these stories, in a simple house high atop a mountain, far from the distractions and corruptions of ordinary village life. A man from the valley below had been struggling with a persistent problem that seemed to have no solution. He had tried everything he could think of, consulting friends, seeking advice from local elders, even visiting other teachers. But nothing had brought him the clarity or peace he desperately sought. When he heard about the holy man on the mountain, he knew he had to make the journey, no matter how difficult it might be. The path up the mountain was steep and treacherous. The man climbed for hours under the burning sun, his feet growing sore, his breathing labored, his water supply dwindling. But his determination never wavered. He was certain that once he reached the top and met this legendary figure, all his troubles would be resolved through the holy man's superior wisdom and spiritual insight. Finally, after a grueling climb that left him exhausted and dusty, he reached the simple house at the mountain's peak. The structure was modest and weathered, exactly what he had expected for someone who had transcended worldly concerns. He approached the door with a mixture of anticipation and reverence, preparing himself to meet someone who possessed wisdom far beyond that of ordinary people. When he knocked, an elderly servant answered. The man was plain and unremarkable, his clothes simple, his manner humble, his appearance entirely ordinary. He looked like any of a dozen servants the visitor might encounter in his own village. "I would like to see the wise, holy man," the visitor said, barely glancing at the servant as he spoke. His eyes were already searching past the old man into the house, eager to catch a glimpse of the extraordinary being he had climbed so far to meet. The servant smiled warmly and gestured for him to enter. "Please, come inside," he said gently, leading the way through the modest dwelling. As they walked through the house, the visitor looked around eagerly, his heart racing with anticipation. He examined every room they passed, searching for signs of the holy man's presence, perhaps special robes, sacred objects, or an aura of otherworldly peace. The servant continued to guide him quietly through the simple rooms, past basic furnishings and ordinary household items. Before the visitor quite realized what was happening, they had walked through the entire house and arrived at the back door. The servant opened it and gestured toward the path that led back down the mountain. The visitor stopped abruptly, confusion and disappointment washing over him. "Wait," he said, turning to face the servant with growing frustration. "I didn't come all this way to be escorted through an empty house. I want to see the holy man. Where is he?" The old servant's smile deepened, and his eyes twinkled with gentle amusement. "You already have seen him," he said quietly. "But, more importantly, I have a teaching for you that will solve whatever problem brought you here today." The visitor stared at him, not understanding. This ordinary old man couldn't possibly be the legendary holy figure he had heard about. Where was the radiant presence, the obvious signs of spiritual attainment, the dramatic wisdom that everyone talked about? "Here is the teaching," the servant continued, his voice soft but carrying absolute conviction. "Everyone you meet in life, even if they appear plain and insignificant to you, see each of them as a wise, holy man or woman. If you can do this, if you can truly see the sacred in every person you encounter, then whatever problem you brought here today will be solved." Buddha's wisdom tells us, if you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions. This tale unveils the profound truth that we find what we're prepared to see, and our capacity for recognition determines what wisdom becomes available to us. Why do we search for the sacred in special places and extraordinary people while overlooking the wisdom that surrounds us every day? Zen Buddhism points to our conditioning that associates spiritual truth with dramatic appearances, exotic circumstances, and obviously impressive figures. But the deepest teachings often come disguised as the most ordinary encounters. The visitor's problem wasn't really the external difficulty that brought him to the mountain. His deeper problem was his inability to recognize wisdom when it didn't match his preconceptions. He was so focused on finding someone who looked like his idea of a holy man that he almost missed the actual holy man standing right in front of him. Consider your own daily interactions. How often do you dismiss people because they don't seem impressive, educated, or obviously wise? The checkout clerk who greets you with genuine warmth, the janitor who works with quiet dignity, the child who asks innocent but profound questions. Any of these encounters might offer exactly the insight you need if you're prepared to receive it. This teaching transforms how we move through the world. Instead of searching for wisdom in special places or waiting for obviously enlightened teachers to appear, we begin to approach every person as a potential source of insight. The homeless person on the street, the difficult co-worker, even the family member who annoys us. Each becomes a teacher when we're ready to learn. Zen Master Dogen taught, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. When we truly see others as sacred, we naturally forget our own ego's need to feel superior or special. The visitor's disappointment came from his attachment to being someone who had access to exclusive wisdom rather than someone who could recognize wisdom everywhere. The Buddha said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." Every person carries this same capacity to kindle understanding in others, but only when we approach them with the recognition that they might have something valuable to offer. Look deeply at your current relationships and daily encounters. Where might you be overlooking wisdom because it comes in an ordinary package? What would change in your interactions if you truly treated every person as someone who might be a disguised holy man or woman? Tonight, as you consider the various people in your life, family members, colleagues, strangers you encounter, can you practice the holy man's teaching? Can you look past surface appearances and social roles to see the deeper wisdom that every conscious being carries? Can you approach tomorrow's interactions with the recognition that your next teacher might be standing right in front of you, waiting to be seen? As the Buddha observed, in the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. The distinction between holy and ordinary, wise and simple, teacher and student exists primarily in our own minds. When we learn to see past these artificial categories, we discover that wisdom is everywhere, waiting patiently for our recognition. Our next story reveals the profound difference between spiritual performance and authentic understanding. This is the teaching of the head that wished to be severed. In the great monastery of Chao Chu, where hundreds of monks gathered daily for meditation and study, the morning routines followed ancient rhythms. After the pre-dawn sitting, as the first light touched the mountain peaks surrounding the monastery, monks would disperse to their various duties, some to the gardens, others to the kitchens, still others to copying sacred texts or maintaining the buildings. One particular morning, the venerable abbot Chao Cho made his customary walk through the monastery grounds, checking on the well-being of his students and the condition of their practice. His presence was both gentle and penetrating. Monks never knew when their most casual words might become profound teachings, or when their deepest spiritual insights might be revealed as mere intellectual concepts. As he passed behind the main meditation hall, a building where the community gathered twice daily for silent sitting, the abbot noticed a young monk sitting alone in the shadow of the wooden structure. The monk appeared to be engaged in some form of practice, though he was apart from the scheduled community activities. "Brother," Chao Cho called softly, approaching with the quiet steps that had become second nature through decades of mindful walking. "Where have all the virtuous ones gone?" The question seemed simple enough, almost like casual conversation, but those familiar with Chao Cho's teaching style recognized the subtle depth in his inquiry. Was he asking about physical location, spiritual attainment, or something else entirely? The young monk looked up with an expression of confident understanding. He had been at the monastery for several years and prided himself on grasping the essential points of Zen teaching. This seemed like an opportunity to demonstrate his comprehension of the Dharma. "They have all gone to work," the monk replied matter-of-factly, gesturing toward the various parts of the monastery where his brothers were engaged in their daily tasks. His tone suggested that the answer was obvious, Virtuous people naturally engage in productive activity rather than sitting idle. What happened next shocked the young monk completely. Without warning, Cao Cho reached into the folds of his robe and produced a sharp knife, its blade gleaming in the morning sunlight. But instead of threatening the monk, the abbot did something far more unsettling. With complete calmness, Cao Cho stretched out his own neck, exposing his throat to the blade, and handed the knife to the bewildered young monk. His voice remained gentle and conversational, as if he were making the most reasonable request in the world. "My responsibilities as abbot are many and demanding," he said with apparent sincerity. "I wonder if you could please cut off my head for me. It would be such a help in managing my duties." The young monk's eyes widened in horror. His hands trembled as he stared at the knife now in his possession and the exposed neck of his revered teacher. Everything about the situation contradicted his understanding of proper monastic behavior, spiritual teaching, and basic human decency. Unable to comprehend what was being asked of him or why, unable to see past the literal surface of the abbot's request to any deeper meaning, the terrified monk dropped the knife and ran. His feet carried him far from the meditation hall, far from the incomprehensible scene, his mind reeling with confusion and fear. Cao Cho calmly picked up the fallen knife, tucked it back into his robe, and continued his morning walk with the same peaceful demeanor he had maintained throughout the entire encounter. As the Buddha observed, it is better to travel well than to arrive. What emerges from this story is a teaching about the vast difference between intellectual understanding and genuine realization. Why do we so often mistake conceptual knowledge for authentic wisdom? Zen Buddhism reveals that our thinking mind loves to collect spiritual ideas and organize them into neat categories, creating the illusion of understanding without the transformative experience of direct insight. The young monk's response, "They have all gone to work," represents the kind of dualistic thinking that separates spiritual practice from ordinary activity. His answer implied that virtue lies in doing productive tasks rather than sitting idly, revealing his assumption that awakened activity and rest exist in opposition to each other. But Cao Cho's teaching cuts much deeper than this surface interpretation. By offering his neck to the knife, he was asking a profound question. If the monk truly understood that all the virtuous ones had gone to work, what work was most essential? If responsibility truly mattered, what was the most compassionate response to suffering? Look deeply at your own spiritual assumptions. How often do we divide life into spiritual activities and mundane ones, important work and trivial tasks, sacred moments and ordinary time? This dualistic thinking keeps us from recognizing that every moment offers opportunities for awakened response. The abbot's gesture points toward the heart of Zen understanding. Genuine compassion sometimes requires actions that transcend conventional thinking. When someone is truly suffering under the burden of responsibility, attachment, or spiritual seeking itself, what is the most loving response? Sometimes it requires cutting through the very thing that seems most precious: our concepts, our roles, even our sense of separate self. Zen master Linji taught, "If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill the Buddha." This famous saying points to the same radical teaching Cao Cho offered. Any fixed idea about enlightenment, any attachment to spiritual roles or concepts, becomes an obstacle to direct realization. True compassion sometimes requires destroying the very thing we think we're trying to protect. The young monk's terror and flight revealed how completely he missed this deeper level of teaching. He remained trapped in literal interpretation, unable to see past the surface of the abbot's words to their transformative invitation. His spiritual understanding, though articulate, remained purely conceptual. Consider your own relationship to spiritual responsibility and helping others. When someone asks for help with their suffering, do we offer concepts and advice, or do we respond from a deeper place of understanding? Are we willing to sacrifice our comfortable spiritual positions to meet others exactly where they are? This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between talking about virtue and embodying it. The monk could identify where virtuous people go and what they do, but when faced with an opportunity for radical compassion, he fled. His knowledge remained divorced from spontaneous, awakened action. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called great doubt, a willingness to question even our most cherished spiritual understandings. This doubt isn't cynicism, but openness to discoveries that transcend our current conceptual frameworks. Are we prepared to have our spiritual certainties challenged, even destroyed, if it serves awakening? Tonight, as you encounter opportunities to help others with their burdens, can you sense the difference between offering what you think they need and responding from genuine understanding? Can you feel how true compassion sometimes requires cutting through your own comfortable assumptions about what constitutes appropriate spiritual behavior? Buddha spoke of this when he said, "In caring for others, you care for yourself. In caring for yourself, you care for others." The abbot's offer to sacrifice his own head points toward this non-dual understanding. When we truly see interconnection, the boundaries between self and other, helper and helped, begin to dissolve into spontaneous, compassionate action. Let us now turn to a tale of a young monk who believed he had failed in his spiritual journey. This is the story of the Golden Wake. At a peaceful monastery overlooking a serene mountain lake, a young student sat dejected on the temple steps as the sun began its descent toward the water. His shoulders sagged with the weight of disappointment, and his eyes reflected the heaviness in his heart. For months, he had struggled with his studies, unable to grasp the profound teachings that seemed to come so naturally to his fellow monks. "The boat is coming to take me home because I have failed in my studies here at the monastery," he said to his teacher, who had quietly approached and sat beside him. "What can I say to my family? They sent me here with such hope, believing I would return as a learned monk who could guide others on the path." The old teacher gazed out at the lake, where a small wooden boat was making its way slowly across the still water. The setting sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber. "Say that you did your best, and that is as much as anyone can do," he answered gently, his voice carrying the wisdom of many years. "But I wanted to be a famous monk and teach others," the boy replied, his voice thick with disappointment. "I dreamed of leading meditation sessions, of having students seek my guidance, of making a real difference in the world." "You can," the teacher said simply. "How?" asked the sad boy, looking at his teacher with confusion. "I couldn't even memorize the basic sutras. I fell asleep during meditation. I failed at everything that matters." The teacher smiled and pointed toward the water. "Live from your heart. I will show you. Do you see that boat making its way across the lake with the sun setting behind it?" "Yes," the boy replied, following his teacher's gaze. "Do you see its wake spreading across the lake? See how the boat looks like the apex of a golden triangle as the wake fans out from its bow?" The boy squinted, trying to see what his teacher described. "Sort of." "Squint," said the teacher patiently. That boat is you as you leave the monastery. The lake is your life. The wake is the effect that you will have on the world. Each ripple triggers another ripple, which triggers another. By constantly striving to live as wise and loving a life as you can teach the path of love to everyone you meet simply by being yourself. A few of these people will pass on your good example to others. Thus, the expanding golden wake of good works begets other good works. Most important, notice how each ripple catches the sun and bounces its light back to heaven. The boy watched in wonder as the simple boat continued its journey, the wake indeed forming an ever-widening triangle of light upon the water. Each small wave caught the golden sunlight and reflected it back toward the sky in countless sparkling points. "Would you come home with me and explain all of this to my father?" asked the boy, hope beginning to kindle in his voice. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, a candle loses nothing by lighting another candle. The deeper teaching here shows us that influence spreads not through grand gestures or perfect knowledge, but through the simple authenticity of a heart committed to goodness. Why do we believe that only formal credentials or recognized achievements qualify us to make a meaningful impact? Zen Buddhism points to our attachment to external validation and our misunderstanding of how wisdom actually transmits from person to person. We imagine that teaching requires a podium, a title, or a certificate, when in reality, the most profound lessons are shared through the quality of our presence and the integrity of our actions. Consider how often throughout your day you encounter people who touch your life not through their expertise, but through their kindness, their patience, or their simple human warmth. The grocery store clerk who greets you with genuine care, the stranger who offers directions with a smile, the friend who listens without judgment. These people create ripples that extend far beyond their awareness. In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called unconscious teaching. This is the natural transmission that occurs when we align our actions with our deepest values. Like the boat on the lake, we may not see our wake, but it spreads inevitably behind us, touching shores we never knew existed. The Buddha said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened." Happiness never decreases by being shared. Each moment of authentic living becomes a teaching. Each act of compassion creates ripples. Each choice to respond with wisdom rather than reactivity sends light back toward heaven. Tonight, as you reflect on your own journey, can you see the golden wake you're already creating? Perhaps it's in the patience you show a difficult family member, the encouragement you offer a struggling colleague, or the simple presence you bring to everyday encounters. The light you reflect may be illuminating paths you've never imagined. Our next story reveals a profound teaching about the nature of emptiness and the surprising places where we discover truth. This is the story of grasping what cannot be held. In a quiet monastery garden where cherry blossoms drifted gently on the morning breeze, Master Sekio sat with one of his most earnest students. The young monk had been studying Buddhist philosophy for several years, filling his mind with concepts about the nature of reality, the illusion of the self, and the teaching of emptiness that seems so central to the Buddha's wisdom. He could recite passages about shunyata, discuss the philosophical implications of non-being, and engage in lengthy debates about the relationship between form and void. But for all his intellectual understanding, something felt missing. The words remained just words, concepts floating in his mind without the direct experience that would make them real. He approached his teacher that morning with a question that had been troubling him for months. "Master," the young monk said, bowing respectfully, "I have studied the teaching of emptiness extensively. I understand that all phenomena arise and pass away, that nothing has permanent, independent existence. But I feel like I'm only grasping concepts. Can you help me get hold of emptiness itself?" Sekio looked at his student with knowing eyes. He had seen this struggle many times before, the gap between intellectual understanding and direct realization, the frustration of trying to grasp with the mind what can only be known through experience. "Show me how you would get hold of emptiness," the master said simply. The monk thought for a moment, then cupped his hands in the air as if he were trying to capture something invisible. He held his hands carefully as though cradling a soap bubble that might burst at any moment. His face was earnest and concentrated, his entire being focused on this attempt to demonstrate his understanding of a teaching about the very nature of nothingness. "There," he said, holding his cupped hands very still. "I'm trying to hold emptiness itself." Sekio looked at the student's empty hands and shook his head gently. "That's not very good," he said with a slight smile. "You haven't got anything in there at all. You're just holding air and calling it something special." The monk's face fell. He had been so certain that his gesture captured something meaningful about the teaching. "Well, master," he said, his voice tinged with disappointment and confusion, "please show me a better way. How does one truly get hold of emptiness?" Without warning, Master Sekio reached out and grabbed the monk's nose, giving it a sharp, firm yank. "Ouch!" the monk yelled, his hands flying to his face, his eyes watering from the sudden, unexpected pain. "Master, that hurt me!" Sekio released his grip and smiled broadly. "Now that," he said with satisfaction, "is how you get hold of emptiness." The monk stood there, rubbing his nose, completely bewildered. His nose throbbed with very real, very unempty pain. How could this physical sensation, this undeniable presence of discomfort, have anything to do with emptiness? It seemed like the opposite of everything he had been studying. But as the initial shock wore off, something began to shift in his understanding. The pain in his nose was absolutely real, yet it was also completely impermanent, already beginning to fade. It had arisen from nowhere, would disappear completely, and left no permanent mark on reality. It was both utterly present and completely insubstantial. More importantly, in the moment of that sharp sensation, all his conceptual thinking about emptiness had vanished entirely. There had been no philosophical analysis, no abstract understanding, just direct, immediate experience. The gap between the one experiencing and the thing experienced had dissolved in the simple reality of ouch. As the Buddha taught, form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Here we discover that emptiness is not the absence of experience, but the very nature of all experience. Everything arises, exists for a moment, and passes away, leaving no permanent trace while being completely real in its moment of appearing. Why do we struggle so hard to understand emptiness conceptually when it's the very fabric of every moment? Zen Buddhism points to our habit of trying to grasp reality with our thinking minds rather than experiencing it directly. We turn the most immediate truths into abstract philosophies, then wonder why they feel distant and theoretical. The monk's mistake was common and understandable. He was trying to hold emptiness as if it were a thing, an object that could be captured and possessed. But emptiness isn't an object. It's the very condition that allows all objects to appear and disappear. It's not something we can grasp, it's what makes grasping possible. Consider your own experience right now. The thoughts arising in your mind. Where do they come from? Where do they go when they fade? The sensations in your body, the sounds around you, even your sense of being someone who is reading these words. All of it is appearing and disappearing in the space of awareness, like clouds in an empty sky. This emptiness isn't blank nothingness. It's alive, responsive, creative, the very capacity for experience itself. When Sekio yanked his student's nose, he wasn't demonstrating the absence of sensation, but the miraculous way sensation appears from nowhere, exists vividly, and dissolves back into nowhere, all within the spacious emptiness of awareness. Zen Master Huang Po taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." The monk was rejecting his direct experience in favor of his concepts about experience. The master's intervention brought him back to the immediacy of seeing, feeling, and knowing without the filter of philosophical analysis. In our daily lives, we constantly encounter this same teaching. The anger that seems so solid and permanent when we're caught in it. Where does it go when it naturally subsides? The worry that feels so important and real. What is its actual substance when we look closely? Even our sense of being a solid, separate self, isn't it actually more like a flowing process? A river that appears to be the same while constantly changing. The Buddha said, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence." This isn't a philosophical statement, but a direct pointing to what's happening right now. Everything we experience is empty, in the sense that it has no permanent, independent existence, yet it's all perfectly real as it appears. Tonight, as you notice thoughts, sensations, and experiences arising and passing in your awareness, can you sense the emptiness that Sekio was pointing to? Not as an abstract concept, but as the very space in which your life is unfolding. Can you feel how this emptiness is not separate from the fullness of your experience, but is its very nature? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, in the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. The emptiness of all phenomena isn't something we need to achieve or understand. It's what we are, what everything is right now. We just need to stop trying to grasp it and let ourselves be grasped by it instead. Let us now turn to a story about the deceptive nature of appearances and the masks we wear in seeking acceptance. This is the tale of the hungry abbot and the generous robe. In a bustling merchant quarter of an ancient Chinese city, where silk traders and wealthy families built elaborate houses behind high walls, there lived a man whose prosperity was known throughout the region. His mansion boasted carved jade doorways, courtyards filled with exotic birds, and servants who attended to every detail of daily life. This man took great pride in his position and was particular about maintaining his reputation among other prominent citizens. One morning, as autumn rain fell steadily on the cobblestone streets, a figure approached his ornate front gate. The visitor was a Zen abbot from a mountain monastery, but he appeared as nothing more than a beggar. His simple brown robes were patched and worn thin from years of use. His sandals were cracked and muddy from walking mountain paths, and his wooden begging bowl showed the stains and scratches of countless meals received in charity. The abbot stood quietly at the gate, rain dripping from his shaved head, and waited with the patient dignity that comes from years of spiritual practice. When the gatekeeper finally noticed him, the man's expression immediately showed disdain. "What do you want, beggar?" the gatekeeper asked harshly, not bothering to bow or show any respect. "This is the house of an important man. We have no scraps for wanderers." "I am traveling and seeking alms," the abbot replied gently. "Perhaps your master would offer a simple meal to a monk." The gatekeeper looked him up and down with obvious contempt. These ragged clothes, this worn appearance. Clearly this was just another vagrant trying to take advantage of his master's household. "Be gone," he commanded. "My master does not waste food on beggars. Seek your charity elsewhere." The abbot accepted this rejection without anger or argument. He simply bowed, turned, and walked back into the rain, his empty bowl tucked beneath his arm. Several hours later, as the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, the same figure returned to the same gate. But now everything had changed. The abbot wore his formal ceremonial robes, rich golden silk embroidered with intricate patterns, a magnificent purple sash across his shoulders, and prayer beads carved from precious wood. His bearing remained humble, but his appearance now spoke unmistakably of high spiritual rank and monastery wealth. This time, when the gatekeeper saw him approaching, his entire demeanor transformed. "Welcome, honored master," he exclaimed, bowing deeply. Please enter. My master will be so pleased to receive such a distinguished visitor." The rich man himself hurried out to greet the abbot personally, offering elaborate bows and flowery words of welcome. "Venerable sir, what an honor for our humble household. You must join us for our finest meal. Please allow us to serve you." They ushered the abbot into their most elegant dining room, where servants quickly prepared a sumptuous feast. Delicate fish, perfectly seasoned vegetables, fragrant rice, and sweet desserts filled the low table. The rich man sat opposite the abbot, beaming with pride at his ability to host such an important religious figure. As the first course was served, the abbot did something completely unexpected. Instead of eating, he carefully removed his beautiful ceremonial robe and folded it with great attention. Then, with deliberate precision, he placed the folded robe directly in front of the feast, as if it were the honored guest. Standing up with quiet dignity, the abbot spoke clearly so all present could hear. "This meal is not for me, it is for the robe." Without another word, he walked out of the house, leaving behind both the magnificent feast and the rich man's stunned realization of his own superficial judgment. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, judge not by appearances, a rich heart may be under a poor coat. Here we discover how our fixation on external appearances creates barriers to genuine human connection and spiritual understanding. Why do we judge others so quickly based on their clothing, status symbols, or outward presentation? Zen Buddhism points to our conditioned mind's habit of creating categories and hierarchies based on surface appearances. This mental shortcut allows us to feel we understand people without the more challenging work of seeing their true nature. The rich man's household represents a pattern we all recognize in ourselves. How differently do we treat the well-dressed stranger versus the poorly dressed one? How does our attention change when someone mentions their impressive job title versus their humble occupation? How does our respect shift when we learn someone's wealth or poverty? This ancient wisdom illuminates our tendency to project worth onto external symbols, rather than recognizing the inherent dignity of every person. The abbot remained exactly the same person in both encounters. His wisdom, compassion, and spiritual realization unchanged by his clothing. Yet the household's treatment of him transformed completely, based solely on appearances. Look deeply at your own patterns of judgment. Perhaps you find yourself making assumptions about people in expensive cars versus old vehicles, designer clothes versus thrift store finds, prestigious addresses versus modest neighborhoods. Each of these judgments reveals how we've been conditioned to equate external appearance with internal worth. The story points us toward a fundamental question about authenticity. If we receive a different treatment based on our presentation, which version of ourselves is real? Are we the person in casual clothes running errands, or the person dressed professionally for important meetings? Are we the one seeking help, or the one offering it? In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called original face, the authentic self that exists beneath all roles, costumes, and presentations. This original face doesn't change whether we're wearing rags or ceremonial robes, whether others treat us with respect or dismissal. Zen Master Bankei taught, "Your original face is not born and does not die." This teaching invites us to recognize that our essential nature, our capacity for awareness, love, and wisdom remains constant, regardless of how others perceive us or how we present ourselves to the world. The abbot's teaching was not just for the rich man, but for all of us who might witness his story. By feeding the robe instead of himself, he revealed how often we relate to people's personas rather than their essence. We honor the title, the clothing, the symbols of status, while missing the actual human being present before us. Consider how this insight might transform your daily interactions. The server at your restaurant, the clerk at the store, the person asking for directions, each carries the same essential dignity as the most honored guest. The challenge is seeing past the uniforms, the circumstances, the social roles, to the original face beneath. This doesn't mean we ignore practical realities or social conventions, but that we hold them more lightly. We can acknowledge someone's professional role while remembering their fundamental humanity. We can dress appropriately for occasions while knowing our worth doesn't depend on our wardrobe. Tonight, as you consider the various roles and presentations you inhabit throughout the day, can you sense the unchanging awareness that witnesses all these temporary costumes? Can you feel the original face that remains constant, whether others see you as important or invisible? The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." The abbot's silent gesture spoke more powerfully than lengthy sermons about equality and compassion. By walking away from the feast, prepared for his appearance rather than his essence, he offered a teaching that continues to resonate across centuries. Let us now turn to a tale that reveals how deeply our ego can hide, even from ourselves. This is the story of the Prime Minister's lesson. In the grand capital of the Tang dynasty, where golden palaces rose toward heaven and scholars debated philosophy in moonlit gardens, there lived a man of extraordinary accomplishments. The Prime Minister had earned his position through brilliance in both statecraft and military strategy, defending the empire from invaders while crafting policies that brought prosperity to millions. His name was spoken with reverence throughout the land, and his counsel was sought by the emperor himself. Yet despite his worldly success, the Prime Minister considered himself a humble student of the Buddha's teachings. Each week, he would leave behind the silk robes and ceremonial duties of his office, donning simple clothes to visit his beloved Zen master in a modest temple on the outskirts of the city. There, surrounded by weathered wooden beams and the gentle sound of wind chimes, he would sit in meditation and receive instruction like any other sincere seeker. The relationship between the two men appeared beautifully balanced. The master treated his distinguished student with neither special deference nor dismissal, and the Prime Minister seemed to approach his teacher with genuine humility and respect. To observers, it appeared that political rank had no bearing on their spiritual connection, simply a wise teacher guiding an earnest student along the path of awakening. On one particular autumn afternoon, as golden leaves drifted past the temple windows, the Prime Minister settled into his usual position before his master. After their customary meditation, he posed a question that had been troubling him. "Your Reverence," he began with careful formality, "I have been contemplating the nature of spiritual obstacles. Could you please explain what egotism means according to Buddhist teaching?" The transformation in the master's demeanor was startling and immediate. His face flushed deep red, his eyes flashed with apparent anger, and in a voice dripping with condescension and contempt, he snapped back harshly. "What kind of stupid question is that? Have you learned nothing in all your visits here?" The Prime Minister recoiled as if physically struck. Never had his teacher spoken to him with such disrespect. His own face grew hot with indignation. How dare this simple monk, who had never governed provinces or led armies, speak to him in such a manner? Did he not understand to whom he was speaking? The Prime Minister's jaw tightened, his hands clenched, and his entire body bristled with wounded pride and rising fury. Then, just as suddenly as the storm had begun, the master's expression softened into a gentle smile. His voice returned to its usual warm, patient tone as he said quietly, "This, Your Excellency, is egotism. Buddha's wisdom reminds us the ego is a veil between humans and God." What emerges from this story is a profound teaching about the subtlety and persistence of our false sense of self. Even when we believe we have cultivated humility, the ego remains, waiting for the right trigger to reveal its hidden presence. Why do we struggle to see our own egotism? Zen Buddhism teaches that the ego is like our own shadow, always present but rarely noticed because we're looking in the wrong direction. The ego is particularly clever at disguising itself in spiritual clothing. We can practice meditation for years, study sacred texts, and even develop genuine compassion, all while maintaining a subtle sense of spiritual superiority or specialness. The Prime Minister's ego wasn't obvious in his daily spiritual practice. He appeared humble, respectful, and sincere. But when his dignity was challenged, when his sense of status and importance was threatened, the ego erupted with full force. This is the ego's signature. It reveals itself not in our calm moments, but in our reactive ones. Consider how often throughout your day you might experience similar moments. A colleague interrupts you during a meeting, and irritation flashes through your mind. A driver cuts you off in traffic, and anger arises. Someone questions your expertise in an area you consider your specialty, and defensiveness emerges. These automatic reactions reveal the ego's constant vigilance, always ready to defend its constructed image of who we think we are. Zen master Suzuki Roshi taught, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the heart of working with ego. We must simultaneously accept ourselves completely while remaining willing to see through our self-deceptions. The ego thrives on both self-hatred and self-aggrandizement, but it dissolves in the light of honest, compassionate self-observation. The master's skillful teaching method reveals another crucial insight. Sometimes the most effective spiritual instruction comes not through gentle guidance, but through direct confrontation with our unconscious patterns. The shock of having his dignity challenged in such an unexpected way created a moment of clarity for the Prime Minister. A sudden recognition of patterns that had been operating below the surface of his awareness. In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called ego transparency, the ability to see through our self-protective mechanisms as they arise. This doesn't mean we eliminate the ego entirely, which would be neither possible nor desirable, but rather that we develop a lighter relationship with it. We learn to recognize its voice without automatically believing its stories. Tonight, as you notice moments of defensiveness, irritation, or wounded pride arising in your interactions, can you remember the Prime Minister's lesson? Can you see these reactions not as character flaws, but as opportunities for deeper self-understanding? As the Buddha taught, you only lose what you cling to. The ego is simply another thing we cling to, a collection of stories about who we think we are. In releasing our grip on these stories, we discover the freedom that lies beyond the prison of self-importance. Tonight, as we bring our shared journey to a gentle close, can you sense how the peace you've experienced isn't something separate or distant, but instead something always within your reach? Can you feel that the profound stillness you've touched tonight lives not just in these stories, but in your own present awareness, quietly awaiting your recognition? The Buddha taught us, all that we are is the result of what we have thought. With our thoughts, we make the world. Reflecting on this insight, remember that peace and clarity do not depend on external circumstances or special states, but blossom from within your own heart and mind, accessible in every moment. Throughout tonight's journey, each story has offered a timeless lesson, pointing repeatedly to the same transformative truth, that suffering eases when we soften our grip, that inner freedom arises naturally when we release our attachments, and that true peace emerges from seeing clearly beyond illusions and reactions. Even if your mind occasionally drifts, even if restlessness resurfaces, the wisdom you've absorbed tonight is now deeply planted in the soil of your consciousness, ready to support you whenever needed. Consider, as you prepare to rest, that these ancient teachings have illuminated not a distant path, but a way of being fully present right here, right now. In the quiet moments that follow, allow yourself to feel how deeply your awareness has shifted, how naturally your breath now flows, and how gently your heart rests, untroubled and open. These teachings are reminders that true wisdom is not hidden on mountaintops, nor locked away in sacred texts. It shines brightly and unmistakably in the ordinary simplicity of mindful awareness. Tonight, you've glimpsed that truth, a truth that the Buddha himself affirmed when he taught. 3 things cannot remain long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. As you move from this peaceful space back into your daily life, carry with you not only the stories themselves, but the profound calm and insight they have kindled within you. May this inner peace serve as your steady companion, illuminating your way through both bright and challenging moments alike. Thank you sincerely for sharing this journey with us at Sleepy Monk. May your rest tonight be restorative and deep, nourishing you fully and awakening you refreshed and ready to greet the morning with renewed clarity, compassion, and joy. Until our paths meet again, may your heart remain open, your mind remain clear, and your spirit continue to grow strong, guided gently by the timeless wisdom of Zen.